John, thank you for your patience. We are now ready for you to begin your 15-minute presentation.
Thank you, Jill. Good afternoon. My name is John Franklin, and I'd like to present to you my 90-day transition plan as your possible chief of police. The first 90 days will be a learning environment, not only for me, but also for the city leaders, community members, and the police department. I've divided my approach into three sectors: city government, community members, and police department personnel. This will allow me to identify the specific needs associated with each of these sections and give me the opportunity to share with them my management and my policing, philosophies. I plan on meeting with command staff, sworn and civilian personnel, and as applicable, the unions. I know you don't have a union here, but I still probably have to meet with the FOP because it represents a lot of officers regarding litigation, legal services. Some of the key external stakeholders identified for information listening sections are the city manager, assistant city manager, mayor, council, department directors, residents, community leaders, business community, community groups, law enforcement partners, and other stakeholders. This plan is designed to give me an understanding of where the department is currently and where it needs to be going. It will also give all the stakeholders a voice in identifying the issues that need to be addressed and areas of excellence. Identify the priorities, long-term needs, and goals of the city. To evaluate the police department's capabilities and its level of commitment to the 21st century policing principles, community engagement, and succession planning. Also to evaluate the relationships and level of cooperation between the police department and other city departments. To assess the residents' perception of the police department's community engagement efforts, ability to prevent crimes and solve crimes. Understand what the needs of the city, the residents, and the police department are, and determine to what degree those needs are being met or not met. Also to establish open lines of communication with all department members. I would meet with the city manager and assistant city manager. It is important to establish open lines of communication and identify the police department's role in the city's short and long-term plans. Identify any real concerns or perceived concerns that the city manager would like to see addressed. Develop an understanding of priorities and expectations of me as your chief of police. Meet with the department's command staff to establish a working relationship and learn their skills, strengths, weaknesses, and management styles. Share my leadership philosophy, values, and expectations. Also determine what the command staff would expect of me. I would also meet with the mayor and council members. Address any needs and or concerns that they may have regarding the police department. I would explain my leadership philosophy and goals for the department. I would also have open, transparent discussions with the unions as applicable that represent the department's members. Share my philosophies, values, and what I expect of them. Find out what their expectations are of me and learn what, if any, concerns or recommendations they have regarding the agency. I would start the process of conducting one-on-one meetings with each sworn and civilian member of the police department. Share my philosophies, establish an open door policy, and evaluate the collective voice relating to the positives and negatives of the department and see what changes, if any, the members would like to see. I would meet with the heads of each city department to ascertain how the police department can support their efforts to better serve the community. Because we all want to come together and have what? A better way of life, a more productive way of life for all residents of the city of Fargo. I would meet with local law enforcement partners, not just our local municipal partners, but also our federal partners, the FBI, the DEA, the U.S. Marshal Service, and prosecutors to establish a collaborative working relationship. Identify what task forces, interlocal agreements, and memorandums of understanding, MOUs, are currently in place in the area. I will conduct listening sessions with community members and leaders, business community, clergy, service organizations. These sessions will allow me to hear what the community's concerns and expectations are of the department and of me. They would also allow me to share again with the public my philosophies and my values. At the conclusion of the first 90 days, all the stakeholders will then have had an opportunity to be heard. They will also have the opportunity to learn about my goals for the department and my philosophies concerning 21st century policing principles and the Guardian concept. Now, my 90-day action plan does not include making changes within the department unless there are issues I believe need immediate action, such as serious organizational or ethical issues or situations that create a liability for the city. Now, let me explain that. When I was chief of the Dalton Police Department, about a month after I got there, I discovered that the officers had not been recertified on the use of the taser. As you all know, the taser is an electronic stun device. It's a non-lethal weapon used. Taser, or Axon as it's called today, Axon requires officers to be recertified every year on the use of the taser. When I got to Dalton after 1 month, I found out my officers had not been recertified on the taser for a total of over 3 years, which would leave the city in serious financial liability if someone were to die after having been have the taser utilized upon their persons. So right away, I had to take all the tasers away. I found out that none of my officers were certified as taser trainers. So I had to reach out to Taser, or Axon as it's called today. I had to send 3 officers out to be schooled to be certified as taser trainers. Then I had to reissue the tasers. Now, my officers are very upset about that because, like your officers here, they ride as one-man cars. You have a low-crime community here for the most part in Fargo. Dalton was not a low-crime community. So the officers felt especially vulnerable not having the taser on their bodies, and they were quite upset about it. But I told them, guys, I have to protect you, and I have to protect the village from liability. So I have no choice but to take them away. So I sent out a sergeant, lieutenant, and a patrolman to all get recertified as taser trainers, and we had to come up with our own program. And then eventually, I reissued the tasers to each officer out there. Because the chief's job is not just to make sure his or her officers are safe, it's to protect the city from potential liability as well. We have to be on the lookout for those kind of issues and cut them off at the pass, so to speak, when we see them coming. Any future changes will be a collaborative effort with stakeholders to ensure the department, community, and the city's needs are met. Okay, I'll take any questions at this point concerning the 90-day plan.
Okay, it appears that there are no follow-up questions at this time.
Okay.
So John, we will have you seated in the middle of the dais,
All
right
right.
behind you.
Thank you.
All right, we are ready to begin your interview. Jen and I will be asking the questions in a rotation. After each question, we'll pause in case there are any follow-up questions by the committee. There are a few of the questions that are a little bit long, so let us know if you need us to repeat any of the questions for you as we go.
Will do.
Okay, very good. We'd like to start off by having you tell us about your leadership style and how it has changed and developed as you've gained more experience as a leader in law enforcement.
My leadership style, I would say, is more what I would call is transformational. I would make any moves I would make as regarding being a chief of police after consulting with my command staff, talking to every member of the department, both sworn and civilian, identifying what problems exist that need correcting, and formulating a plan along with the command staff to try to fix those problems. I've always practiced an open door policy. I want people to feel free to come approach me about anything they feel that needs to be addressed. No question is dumb or anything like that. I want people to feel free to say whatever they need to say. And if you make a call to me, I would get back to you. If you send me an email, I would probably respond the same day. I think I have a pretty easy communicative style with people, and I think that serves me well. Anything else?
I have a follow-up to that. In your presentation, you had mentioned the guardian concept, and I remember hearing that when we interviewed you earlier. Can you tell that to us again?
Yes, ma'am. Traditionally, law enforcement has operated on the culture of being a warrior, so-called. We will defend the constituents. We will defend the community. Now we are operating on this came about mainly as a result of the 21st century principles of policing that President Obama had during his tenure. Now most police departments focus on working with the community to help solve problems in a collaborative manner. Many police departments now will simply reach out and ask the community. They do community surveys to find out, what do you feel are the most pressing issues that we can help to increase and improve the quality of life among all the residents here in our community, whichever respective community that it is. And then the officers would work with the community to make a plan to serve the community, to eradicate or at least lessen those issues that the community feel are the most distressing within the community. It used to be that police departments didn't really ask or reach out to the community much to ask them what they should be focused on. They just went out there and fought crime as it jumped out in front of them, literally, or just answered calls. Now it's been much more collaborative over the years with community policing. Back where I come from in Chicago, we had beat meetings. Every beat had a beat meeting every month. The residents would come out and we would identify with the community the 5 most pressing issues of the community, and we would come back the next month with data to show how we had worked on those problems, how we had lessened whatever those issues were. Were they auto thefts? Were they prostitution? Were they drugs? Were they burglaries, thefts from major businesses, that sort of thing. And I actually like working in that style. Where you had community meetings and the community would vote on the 5 most pressing issues. There'd be a lot of issues up on the board, but the community would vote on what they felt were the 5 most important issues to deal with. And then as a beat team leader, as a sergeant, I would go out with my team and we would work on that issue for the next month. And we'd come back to the beat team meeting with data to show what we had done to alleviate the problem. I think that's the most direct. I think people appreciate that. They love to see the data in front of them showing that those issues have improved or have been completely eradicated. You're welcome, ma'am.
Okay, the next question. Many police departments operate under a paramilitary command structure. Is this the right structure for the police departments in 2020 and into the future? How do you think this internal command structure affects the overall culture and morale of the police departments? If you think there's a better approach to leadership within police departments, please describe.
I think the paramilitary structure has served the department reasonably well for all the years I have worked in it. Obviously, there are times when officers or people within the department go around the command structure because they feel there is a pressing issue that they feel needs to be addressed. And they may feel that going straight up the chain of command as it's done in the military is not an effective strategy for dealing with it. Excuse me, something wrong? Okay. For instance, it's expected that an officer who has a complaint or a problem will go up the chain to the patrolman to the corporal to the sergeant, and sergeant to lieutenant, and so forth. Sometimes you will find some officers feel a problem is so pervasive, or they feel that the command structure, their immediate supervisor, is not willing to give the problem the attention it deserves, that they feel they have to go above their supervisor's head. Most departments don't encourage that, and I would always encourage an officer to go through the chain of command. But if the chain of command is either insensitive to or is not willing to actively address the problem, of course, then I would want to hear about it as the chief. I think any chief would want to hear about an issue, regardless of where it comes from. I will say that I still believe the paramilitary structure is probably going to endure, at least for the foreseeable future. I don't know what else would supplant it at this time. So I don't see much of a change to the paramilitary structure. But I think today you'll find that every police chief, every police department in America is open and willing to accept change where they feel it will improve not only police service to the community, but improve the quality of life for all the residents. And also add to officer retention, because that's a big issue too.
Follow up? Do you see a way to integrate like citizen into the military, the paramilitary structure. So, for example, how would a social worker work its way into this command structure?
I'm not going to sit here and tell you that a social worker would have rank within the department, but I would tell you this: if I had social workers assigned to my police department at my staff meeting, those social workers would be expected to be present. I would want them at the table with all of my command staff.
Thank you.
And I did that when I was the chief of Jacksonville. I had several civilians sitting in on my staff meetings every month. They weren't exactly police department members, but they worked so closely with us, I felt they needed to be there to hear what was going on and to receive their input on certain issues too.
Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
Thank you. And just a reminder to our audience, if you should need to take a call or would like to have a conversation, we would just ask you to step into the hallway briefly for that conversation, so we allow focus for our candidates and our committee members. Thank you. John, our next question. In light of recent events, what have you learned from incidents around the country related to protests and riots? As the Fargo Police Chief, how would you support the right to a peaceful protest while protecting a city from individuals who use the peaceful event as an opportunity to incite a riot? What steps would you take to try to prevent violence and rioting?
This is what I would do. I would talk to the heads of these protest groups. I would like to meet with them in my office to find out exactly what kind of protest they'd like to have, how long do they expect the duration of it, where they like to have it, so we could have it mapped out on the street and provide safe access for everybody who'd wish to participate or to view it. Regarding the, what I guess what you'd want to call the agitators or the subversives, I would hope that we would be able to get some intel on their issues, on their activities, so we would have an inkling of what they had planned. I know, well, I don't know if you all have seen the videos from Chicago where we've had these groups, we just call them the Black Umbrella Gang for right now. They show up with black umbrellas, they open the umbrellas, they change clothes into all black clothing, and they have an arsenal hidden underneath those umbrellas. And just maybe 2.5 weeks ago at our Buckingham Fountain, they pelted the police with frozen bottles of water, rocks, and whatever else they can get their hands on. And it was pretty horrifying to watch because I saw the officers were completely unprepared for what occurred there. They had another incident just recently within the last week, and I think the officers did a pretty good job of containing them and arresting them. But clearly you have to have a good outreach in the community. You have to have people out here who are willing to come forward and tell us if they know something bad is going to happen or something that's going to divert from a peaceful protest. And I hope that the citizens would feel comfortable enough to let us know that another group is going to come and try to usurp or take away from a peaceful protest. I don't have a problem with peaceful protests. Protest is American as apple pie, but I have a problem with people showing up with an arsenal of hard projectiles to beat down, injure, and possibly fatally injure a policeman. I have a problem with that, and I'd like to get as much intel on that to prevent that from happening. It's a bad situation out here in some of these cities, and also including Chicago regarding this. And I hope that if there are more marches planned here in Fargo, whoever your next chief is will work very hard to establish good communication to and from with the various protest groups, that they would feel comfortable with telling us, hey, look, we want to have a peaceful protest. We're planning this for this day, but we fear this other group should come, and they're going to be about 30 or 40 strong. We want to let you know. And I'd like to have that information. I'd like to have my officers prepared. I don't want to see officers injured, hurt, or worse. Chicago has currently over 200 officers that have been injured in these incidents. And for a department your size of 188 people, that would, having, say, 50% of your officers injured at that degree would decimate your manpower to go out here and do all the things that the police do out here to increase the quality of life for everybody here. So, okay.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Morale is a common issue in law enforcement agencies. The Fargo Police Department has experienced issues with morale as well. What methods have you used in previous leadership positions to measure employee engagement, satisfaction, or morale? In general, what strategies do you believe are most effective to maintain employee engagement overall satisfaction, and positive morale within a police department?
I'll tell you what I've done, what's worked for me. I acknowledge good works by the officers. We had awards we gave out in Jacksonville when officers saved lives through the use of Narcan. Some officers had saved multiple lives with Narcan, and we had a ceremony about every 2 months where we gave them plaques and acknowledged their efforts to help the community and to keep those addicted members of the community, help them get help, hopefully get the help they need when they brought them back with Narcan. Outstanding arrests, we've also given accolades to. I was frequently emailing the city council members to let them know when my officers made a particularly good arrest. I can remember a sergeant and a patrolman broke up a major fraud ring that started in Georgia and gravitated into Arkansas. And they ran upon it at a Lowe's store and they broke it up and they arrested about 7 people. And they were committing major frauds among these big box stores all along the South. And I made sure all the city council were aware of it on an email. And the officers were surprised when the city councilman saw them on the street and said, "Hey, officer, nice arrest the other day. I read about what you did over at Lowe's." And it's like, "Chief, how'd they know about that?" I said, "I let the councilman know." They said, "Well, why did you do that?" I said, "Because they need to know what you're doing. They vote on your budget. They approve everything we do. So they need to know when you're doing some good work. Everybody needs to know when officers are doing a good job." And we also gave them an award because it was a major incident and the feds stepped in and took it over from us. But it was a major interstate fraudulent ring, and it was a very good job they did. I want everybody to know what they did. Giving out awards, attaboys, acknowledging them at roll calls does a tremendous amount of good for their self-esteem and their ego. And you can't do more with say, I can't give one officer a raise as opposed to another officer. They're all making the same scale pretty much. But them standing up and being acknowledged and praised and roll call for an excellent job, for serving above and beyond, you can't put a price tag on that. And, it makes the other officers say, "Well, doggone, I'm going to go out there and find something good they can talk about me about." So it really creates a situation where they all want to do well. They all want to be praised. Officers do a lot of good things every day that nobody knows about. And it's good to acknowledge the things we do know about that we can praise them for. Everybody needs to know they're doing a good job.
As the chief of police, you lead a command staff who are responsible for the oversight of divisions of the department. How do you engage your command staff to lead in a way that supports your overall strategy while engaging, inspiring, and informing the officers who work in their divisions?
Well, first of all, you've got to sit down and have a talk with all of your command staff to find out what their needs are in their various divisions. What are their needs? Are their needs being met? What resources do they need to make their various divisions better? And try to find those resources for them. And in encouraging your command staff to acknowledge those officers, those detectives, those investigators when they're going out there doing a good job, giving them tips on what they could do to make the people under their command feel more appreciated, because that's important out here in this profession today. A lot of officers don't feel very appreciated. There's a climate, a pall over this country that has kind of pushed a negative light on law enforcement. So, now, don't get me wrong. I went out on a ride along with one of your officers the other day, and we must have had at least 15 hand waves. You have a lot of good community support out here for your officers, and I was really impressed with what I saw out here. And I saw a lot of that down in the South, too, in Jacksonville. But every officer in every department doesn't see that in every municipality, and that's important. You got to stay engaged with your command staff. Some of them know what to do, and some of them need a little bit of push to move that envelope a little bit better so that their officers under their commands feel that their boss cares about them, that their boss knows what they're doing and appreciates their efforts. And it's important to have open lines of communication. I usually will hold a staff meeting every month, sometimes more, most times not more than once a month. But it's good to hear what their officers are doing. And when you see that their officers have done a good work, you might send an email to your command staff member and say, "Hey, what'd you say to John about that excellent arrest the other day?" He may not have said anything. "Hey, boss, I'll shoot him an email today." Just to give them a reminder that, hey, they need a little bit of push sometimes. They need a little bit of acknowledgement, and just staying engaged with the command staff so that everybody under their command knows that they're appreciated.
How have you worked to educate yourself on the racial and socioeconomic inequalities at a local, state, and national level? And how do you think those factors will influence your leadership of our police force?
It's important for every chief to be up to speed on the social and economic factors in the municipality where they lead a police department, because those factors play a big role, excuse me, in how you manage your police, how you manage crime, because most of the crime is going to occur among the lower socioeconomic classes in any given community. So it's important that you reach out to them. It's important you reach out to the young people in those communities, because a lot of them don't get a lot of positive support or input at home. A lot of those children, those young people, are raised in single family households where the parent, if they're working, they may be working so many jobs or so many hours, they may not have a lot of input or active discussion with their kids about their hopes, their goals, their dreams. And it's important that while law enforcement can't replace the role of the parent, we can certainly reach out to those kids and tell them, hey, you know, I see you wearing this star one day. I see you wearing this uniform one day. You really think so? Yeah, I sure do. And it's important to reach out to those kids, you know, at a young age. I know in Jacksonville, we had a Citizens Police Academy, and while I was there, I created a junior Citizens Police Academy for the high school students, because I wanted to strike a fire in those kids while they're early in high school that, yeah, maybe I could be a police officer. Maybe I could be a sergeant. Maybe I could be a chief. Maybe I could be a leader in my community and be a guardian in my community if they're going to stick around, you know. So you have to really reach out to these kids young. And it's important that we reach out to the kids at the lower economic end of the city or the municipality we serve, because those are the most vulnerable. Those are most vulnerable to being swayed in a negative direction or a positive direction. We can't necessarily fight back all the negativity they're going to see in some of those communities, but we can be the positive light that may show them a better way forward.
Describe your experience gathering and tracking police department data to maintain an equitable police department in regards to race, homelessness, income, and other demographic factors. How has this data been collected and analyzed in police departments you have led? And how have you utilized this data in your department's operations and strategic plan?
Can you repeat that question, please? That's a kind of
Yes.
a long one.
That is a long one. So we'd like to begin by having you describe your experience gathering and tracking police department data to maintain an equitable police department in regards to race, homelessness, income, and other demographic factors. How has this data been collected and analyzed in police departments you have led? And how have you utilized this data in your department's operations and strategic plan?
Back in Chicago, officers used to have to fill out a card on every traffic stop, which was collated, and we would come up with data to see how many people on traffic stops that were committed by officers were African American, were female, were Latino, etc. And that data was used and distributed among every city station, every city district station. It's important to look at that data because you can definitely discern in some cities that are more racially diverse, you can definitely discern some signs of racial bias. If you have a city that, like Chicago now, is one third black, one third white, and one third Hispanic, if you're seeing that 60, 70% of your traffic stops are on African Americans, then you've got a problem there, I'd say. Most people look at that data and say, there's a problem here. Regarding homelessness, you can look at your arrest stats and determine how many of those arrestees are listing themselves as homeless or not having a permanent address. And you can discern data from that. Regarding income, a lot of CompStat information tells you where crimes are occurring. And unfortunately, in major cities, you're seeing a lot of crimes occurring in impoverished neighborhoods. However, it's been a recent trend recently, at least back home, where we're seeing a lot of major crimes occurring in some of the more affluent areas of the city as well. it tells us that active, aggressive criminals are more mobile. They will go to more locations outside of their normal, shall we say, stalking grounds to find victims. We didn't used to have robberies or sexual assaults in our, what we call our Gold Coast area of Chicago. We have that happening now. We didn't used to have carjackings in that area. We have them now. And that's an area of Chicago where we have most of our police officers patrolling the wealthiest areas of the city. And yet we're having more of those crimes coming down there. So clearly, you've got hardened criminals that are looking also and saying, you know, I can find a better class of victim in that area, and that's where I'm going. So we may have to divert more officers, as the city has, to that Gold Coast area to protect it. Recent riots we've had there have happened in that area. Data's important, and you have to follow the data. And you have to make sure you're doing a very, very fair and equitable job of following the data so you can come up with plans to defeat crime wherever it's happening, whether it's in a poor socioeconomic area, a middle-class area, a predominantly African-American area, or a racially diverse area. But data is extremely, extremely important. I don't know any department that is not data-driven today regarding those issues.
What was one of the most difficult decisions you have had to make as a leader in law enforcement? Please describe the circumstances and the outcome.
Difficult. Wow. I think the most difficult position any chief can be in is the decision to terminate an employee. I think we all hope that there are proper interventions in place to change unprofessional or unacceptable behavior before it comes to that. And you hope that with your lower ranking officers, your sergeants, your lieutenants, they will catch some of this behavior, see where it's becoming a trend with that officer, and be able to basically reel him or her in with various interventions, say as much as even having an admonishment, having a formal counseling session, suspending that officer for a day or 2 days or 5 days. And I find it's very unfortunate when an officer commits an act that's so egregious that there is no other suitable penalty but to terminate them. I had a young officer when I got to Jacksonville. He had been with the department as a cadet before I had arrived. They hired him at 18 as a cadet, and they hired him full-time as a police officer at age 21. And unfortunately, as we're seeing a lot of now, particularly with these stressful times about marches and people's perceptions on Black Lives Matter and other groups, this officer got online and posted some very, shall we say, risque pictures of himself. And when I saw the pictures, they got mailed into us. We knew right away who he was. And unfortunately, he took the pictures with his duty belt and his radio sitting in the background on his nightstand in his home. So, I hated to lose any officer, and he was considered to be a good officer. I'd give him a couple awards. I'd given him recently a life-saving award for use of Narcan and another award for apprehending a dangerous man on the street. But because of his actions with that social media, I had no choice but to terminate him. And I didn't enjoy that. Clearly, he was 24 years old. He had a wife. He had a baby. But I just felt that what he did was so egregious that we just couldn't keep him on. And I had to terminate him. It didn't give me any pleasure to do that, but that was a situation where, the punishment fit the crime, so to speak. I'd say that's probably the hardest job any police chief has, is deciding that someone is no longer of any value to the agency. That's a hard call to make. You like to think that everyone is redeemable, that you can put certain things in place where people will change their behavior, because it's often shown in studies that it's cheaper to change someone's unacceptable behavior as opposed to firing them, because many times these people that get fired, they wind up suing and getting put back on your department, which creates more tension having to take them back. But sometimes some of the actions are just so bad that there's just no room to go on this. Incidents of officers committing acts of theft or sexual improprieties. there really is no saving them at that point. They've got to go. I can tell you when I was chief of Dalton, 2 days after I took over as the chief there, I had a senior citizen come tell me that one of my sergeants had stolen a firearm out of his house 2 years before I arrived there. And I'd asked the sergeant about it. He identified the sergeant, had me working that day. So that's the guy that took it. And the sergeant denied to me to my face for 8 months. Claimed no knowledge of the weapon. He never touched it. He'd never been in the man's house. He never took anything. And I had talked to the mayor about it because I was the new chief. I didn't know who I could trust there to investigate this. And I told the mayor, I've got to go outside of the house to have this looked at. I believe the senior citizen, and I need some outside investigators to look at this. I don't know who I can trust here who can do a fair and impartial investigation. So I went with our local county sheriff's department, and in 8 months, they finally came out there and interviewed him. And you know, that sergeant actually had to go in a drawer and hand me back that weapon that he had denied knowing any knowledge about for the prior 8 months. And then, of course, I had to terminate him. But because we were a union police department, it took 15 months after the day I terminated him to get his termination finalized. But I had to do it. And you know, it's interesting, after I had to go through all that and terminate that man, I had several officers come up and thank me for getting him out of our agency. They said, Chief, he's been a terrible guy for years, but no one wanted to take him on until you got here. So we're grateful that he's no longer here. He tarnished all of us. And I was quite shocked to see several officers come forward and say that. And but I knew I had done the right thing. I couldn't keep him after committing something like that. And, of course, lying to me for 8 months about it.
Tell us how you have developed work relationships through trust and respect. Please describe a specific example of your ability to maintain positive relationships with the staff you supervise.
One thing I've learned is to get each staff member, at least of the command staff, get them alone, have a lunch with them. I've taken all of my captains to lunch when I was chief of the Jacksonville Police Department. And just having an informal lunch, a sit down, away from crowds, away from everyone, you learn so much about their family life, and you learn so much about how they got to where they were, how many years of service they put in, how long they've been a captain or lieutenant or whatever. And you develop this relationship basically as a friend, and then it goes from there. I was very fortunate to come in and meet right away with my command staff when I got to Jacksonville. Jacksonville had a pretty tumultuous time under the previous chief. And I met with each command staff member privately, took them all out to separate lunches, sat down and talked to them. I was also a member of the Rotary Club, and I brought each of them in and introduced them to the Rotary members. And the Rotary members are all the movers and shakers of your city. I introduced all of them to the Rotary Club and told them about their years of service, highlights of their career, and it made them feel important. And I think after a while, the trust got there, and they realized they could come tell me things they may not normally would have said to the new chief, but they would come tell me about some things we needed to have rectified within our agency. And it worked out real well for me. I had the trust of the command staff. They had my trust. We had mutual respect for each other. And I was very pleased to work with them. And I also had monthly staff meetings. You know, I think I took about every supervisor in my department out to lunch at some point in time, just to sit down one-on-one and get to know something about them that I'm not going to find out in passing in the hallway or just riding with them in a squad car for an hour. And that's important, trying to sit down and have that develop a relationship with each person. And that takes time. In a big agency, you probably wouldn't be able to do it like Chicago. But I think your agency is about at the size where I think I could do it if I were selected. But it's important for the chief to reach out and make those overtures. You know, you can't lead well from a podium or from a glass-walled office. You have to get out and mingle with the troops and go out there with them, go on calls, watch how they respond to people, how they talk to people, those sort of things. And you make mental notes or even write them down and talk to them later in areas you think they might need to improve. And I've had officers tell me, well, thanks, Chief. I never thought about it that way. I'll try it your way. And, if you can make positive change and not make people feel like you're steamrolling them into making change, that they want to make it on their own, so much the better.
What responsibility have you had with leading a strategic budgeting process for a police department? How did you develop and present your budget request?
Oh, that's an interesting question. When I got to the Dalton PD as their chief in 2013, I found out after I got there, the Dalton PD had never had a budget. Never. So when they hired the new city manager, I cornered him in his office. I said, you know what you and I have to do? He said, what? We have to make a budget for the Dalton PD. He said, what do you mean we got to make, don't they have one? I said, no, they don't. He said, you're kidding. I said, no, I'm not. And it took us about a month, but we eked out a budget of $5.6 million. And for the next fiscal year, we managed to stay within our budget. I never had to go back to the city council and ask for any additional funding. Everything was fully funded for the next fiscal year. But it took about a month to really hammer it down. And of course, I had to go to get advice from my command staff. What is this really going to cost us at the course of a year? What is that really going to, what kind of outlay are we going to have for tires and, motor maintenance and all that sort of thing? It took about 30 days. I mean, we worked on it on weekends, but in 30 days, we had a working budget. We presented it to our trustees. They approved it, and we stayed within our budget. I was afraid we wouldn't be able to stay within our budget for a whole year because it was our first ever budget, but we did manage to do it. And I consider that a huge accomplishment because, I'd never done a budget myself. I had studied that, in my master's degree program, line item budgeting and other kinds of budgeting, but to actually hammer one down and put it out was a lot of work, but it was worth it because I knew where we stood. I knew what we had to do to reduce expenditures, and I knew we could live within that budget and not have to go back to our trustees to ask for more money because no chief wants to do that. And I know you guys don't want to see your chief come back and do that, so.
All right, we are on your last question.
Yes, ma'am.
To what extent have you been involved in establishing, communicating, and following up on performance expectations? How did you align performance expectations with organizational goals? And please be specific in your examples.
I'm going to need you to repeat that question.
Sure. To what extent have you been involved in establishing, communicating, and following up on performance expectations? How did you align performance expectations with organizational goals? And please be specific in your examples.
Okay. Performance expectations. Typically in police work, we have used things such as amount of tickets written, amount of arrests made. Those were all the old standard ways of evaluating people. Those don't really apply anymore. Just because an officer hasn't made a lot of arrests doesn't mean he or she is not productive. Just because an officer hasn't written a lot of tickets doesn't mean he or she is not productive. So we've got new goals we have to use now. We look at the data on a particular beat and we study how much crime has occurred before this officer took over a beat and how much crime has occurred on that beat since an officer took that beat over as a beat officer. With regard to commanders, when I first got to Dalton, I had the mayor ask me about trying to bring one of my lieutenants into the command staff ranks. And I didn't really know the guy well, but the mayor said he's a good guy, he's been around for a while, John. See if you can work him in your command staff ranks. Well, the guy was a nice enough guy, but I gave him small tasks to do maybe 2 or 3 times a week while he was working as a watch commander. I said, by the way, while you're here today, I need you to get these 3 things done for me. And I would only give him 2 or 3 things, and they weren't really major things. They weren't complicated things to do. And at the end of the shift, if I didn't catch him at the end of the shift, I'd see him next day and say, oh, by the way, did you get those things done I gave you yesterday? And he would tell me, well, boss, I was out there on the street and it got busy. I said, you didn't answer my question. Did you get those things done I needed you to do? Well, no, boss, I didn't. I said, okay. So I let another couple days go by and I gave him another 3 simple tasks to do while he was on duty as a watch commander. And again, I stuck around till 11 o'clock when he got off, 11 p.m. And again, I asked him, hey, by the way, did you get those things I gave that list of tasks I need you to do today? And again, he told me, boss, I got tied up here. I was doing this. Again, I asked him, but did you get those things done? No, boss, it kind of got away from me. So the next week, I gave him another small task of 3 things I needed him to do while he was on duty as a watch commander. And again, he gave me the same excuse at the end of the tour of duty. So I reached out to Mayor at the end of the month because the mayor called me. Hey, how's that guy coming? I said, Mayor, I'm not going to make him a commander. Really? But everybody speaks so well of him. I said, Mayor, I'm sure they do. But if he doesn't get the small things I need him to do, how's he going to do the big things? If I can't get him to do the little tasks, the big tasks will also get away from him. And so far, he's shown no initiative in getting the small tasks done. I said, so unfortunately, Mayor, I know you like the guy. I know a lot of people think well of him. He's not ready to be a member of the command rank, and I'm not going to move him up there at this time. I said, now I may revisit it later. We'll see. I said, but this time he's incompatible with what I need and what the department needs in a commander. But I was able to explain that to the mayor, and he accepted that. And really, I wasn't all that concerned about whether he liked what I had to say or not. I had to tell him the truth. The guy just wasn't cut out for making command decisions and being accountable. I couldn't reduce him in rank from a lieutenant because that was a civil service rank, but I certainly wasn't going to promote him with what I saw as a substandard level of performance at 3 different instances. And I gave him more than ample opportunity to rise up to the occasion, or at least show me he was capable of rising up to the occasion, and he failed each time. Now, as far as performance expectations, today you're not going to see things like citations written or DUIs written, things of that nature, unless the officer's working in some kind of a traffic enforcement group. Officers are judged on a lot of things, like how well they relate to the people in their community, how conscientious they are about handling tasks you may need to give them to do while they're out there in the performance of their duties. How often do they check in with the shelters on their beat? How often do they check in with other social services and see what their needs are? Those are things you can also grade officers on as far as performance expectations. It's not just about riding around in a car and staring at people out of a window. What are you doing to interact with the community? What are you doing to make your presence felt? What are you doing to instill trust in the community to the point where these people can reach out to you if they see a problem? And those are also aspects that you would want to grade your officers, or how do I say, evaluate them on their performance goals. It's not about anymore about throwing cuffs on somebody anymore. We all make arrests out here from time to time. Some will make more than others. Some are more aggressive than others in pursuing various criminal activities out here. But there's more than one way to judge an officer or to rate an officer on their performance. It's not just about making arrests or seizing cars or this and that. It's about how are they increasing the quality of life in the area where they patrol the city. And that's measurable. You can go out here and talk to people and say, oh yeah, Officer Chris, he's out here all the time. We used to have a problem with the kids across the street, but he's cleared that up. Or we had a problem with gangbangers in the alley or whatever, or open air drug market. He's cleared that up. And those guys see him, they disappear. And we've seen an improvement in the neighborhood. We've seen an improvement on the block. We've seen an improvement in the community. That's measurable. You can't take away from that. So those are things I would look at also regarding rating people.
Thank you. Are there any follow-up questions?
Can you talk to us about accreditation, whether your past places that you worked at had that, and what your opinion of it is?
I know there's a lot of talk about CALIA. I know the chief of Beloit. No, the other guy, excuse me, the other candidate talked about he was a CALIA accreditor for agencies. I don't know what accreditation you all have here currently. I'm sure you're not CALIA accredited, are you, Sarge? No. That may be something we want to explore in the future. However, CALIA accreditation is considered like the gold star of accreditation for police agencies, but it is expensive and it is very time consuming. That's something whoever your next chief is may want to look into. But that's considered like a gold star. You are considered to be a top tier agency if you can have and maintain CALIA accreditation.
Yes. Here.
In our downtown area, we have some difficulties with homelessness. In the areas you have been, how have we handled that? We have some business owners, is question to arrest them, social services, what do we do with these people?
Dr. Mahoney, where I come from in Jacksonville, we did not have a homeless shelter in Jacksonville. We had one in the adjacent town. And we would call them and see if they had beds available, and we would arrange transport for those people to go to that shelter. I don't know how many shelters you have here. I know you do have a few. Unfortunately, among some of the homeless, you have people in that group that are just not going to be able to fit into a shelter for various issues. When I was in Chicago, PD, we actually had homeless sleeping in the lobbies of our district stations at night. And we would have the Department of Human Services come through with a van and take some of them to shelters. And I would ask them, because some nights I'd be out there past midnight. I said, how come you ever take those guys? They said, Commander, they don't fit well in a shelter environment. We've tried before, and the shelters have told us, please don't bring him back. We can't help him. Some people out here have some serious traumatic or psychosis going on that's just going to make them unsuitable for a shelter environment. That's that gray area nobody talks about. What do you do with the people that nobody can house, that nobody wants to house? And that continues to be a discussion to this day. Everybody can't fit in a shelter. Some people have so many issues going on. There's just nothing for them. They're going to have to remain out on the street until we find whatever that solution is going to be. I don't believe in arresting people just because they're homeless, and I don't believe in arresting people who are homeless and mentally ill, because that serves no purpose either. I don't believe mentally ill people deserve to be in a cell. That's not a proper environment for them. You're not helping them, and it's definitely not a bonus for the police department either. But we do have a significant number of people that fall in that gray area where they're not going to go to a shelter. The shelters will turn them away, and we can't place them in the jail because they haven't necessarily broken the law, but they're disruptive. They might be aggressive out there in the streets. People may find their presence to be disconcerting, to say the least, because of things they say, things they utter. There is no easy solution to that. Most of the homeless, we can find places for. We can network and make sure if we can't get them in shelter A, we can talk to shelter B. But some shelters are dry, meaning you can't come in there being an alcoholic or having any drug issues. Some shelters are wet, considered wet, and they'll let them in with alcoholism and other issues. And some people just don't fit that mold. And it's always a bad situation. Like I said, these people sleep in our police stations, what we call district stations in Chicago. We have 22 district stations. You can come in here any night and step over the homeless or come to the desk to report a problem or have a report taken. They're in there 30, 40 deep sometimes, depends on where you're at. But our former mayor said our stations had to be open and accessible to the public, and they certainly are.
Follow up?
Yes.
So, Chief Franklin, you were in charge when an unarmed black person was shot and it made news. Can you walk us through how you handled it? What kind of blowback did you get from the community? Any trust issues there, or how you handled it with your officers?
You're talking about in Jacksonville?
I think so.
Yes, sir. What had happened was we had a 22-year-old mentally ill young man, who had popped up on our radar one day. He walked into the bank and he handed the bank teller some crayon-drawn $100 bills. Said, I want to deposit this money in my account. Bank teller told him, no, sir, you don't have an account here, and that's crayon money. We don't take that. They called the police. No crime, no foul. He was sent on his way. He came back that afternoon through the drive-up window and gave a letter to the teller through the suction tube, informing her that he would appreciate a loan of $36,000 so he could go out and buy a pickup and join a gym, and he would consider this a donation. He would be eternally grateful to her. Well, again, they called the police, but it's not a threat. It's not a bank robbery. Again, he was sent on his way. This same individual, a few days later, broke into a Ford dealership, and he attempted to steal a large, oversized Ford F-250 pickup with some very large tires on it. The cleaning crew at night heard him break in, and they ran down the street to the Shell station, told him to call the police, that there was an intruder inside the Shell station. And you could see him on video He comes in there and he's looking around, and he finally gets the keys to the truck and he's trying to drive it away. Well, by that time, the officers, before he drove the truck away, or tried to, he had opened the overhead door. So my officers came in from the overhead door, and they drew their weapons, told him to halt. He started driving the truck in their direction. Each officer felt the other was in fear of their life because they couldn't see the other officer over the hood of the truck, and they believed this subject was trying to run over each other, the partner. And they both opened fire on the subject and killed him. It was a pretty sad thing to see and pretty tragic on video. They had body cams, and of course, there was an overhead cam in the Ford dealership itself. Fortunately, I was a member of the NAACP, the Jacksonville branch, and I kept them in the loop. They had immediately reached out to me, and I kept everything open and transparent with them. I managed to have them reach out to the family because I wanted to go by and express my condolences to the mother, which I did the next day. The mother had also tried to get her son committed, get a petition from a judge signed to get him committed to an institution because of his deteriorating mental actions, but the judge refused to sign the petition. He felt there wasn't enough there to warrant it. I kept the NAACP informed about the situation. There had been a bad shooting in Little Rock, which is 30 minutes south of us. It's a major city in Arkansas. And they had marches, they had rioting, and I was worried about that. So I stayed on top of it with our local NAACP branch. When we completed our investigation, I even brokered through the NAACP how many family members would come to see the video. I wanted the family to see the video before we released it to the public. It was pretty horrific to watch, and I didn't want them being surprised on the news to see that. So we had a private viewing for them in the station, and we agreed on how many family members would come in and watch the video. And of course, they were quite distraught to see what happened. It was released to the public. And afterwards, after our investigation was completed and the shooting was ruled justifiable by the Pulaski County Sheriff's Department, Pulaski County Prosecutor's Office, the NAACP law team asked if we could turn a file over to them. They were asked to review it, and we did turn a file over to them containing everything we had, and their own legal team also ruled that the shooting was justifiable. So we didn't have any marches, and we didn't have any rioting, and everything was done open and transparent.
Thank you.
That's just part of the outreach of being a chief. I got to tell you, when I got there, I was a volunteer at the Boys and Girls Club. I joined NAACP. Been down in the South, churches are a big issue. So everybody kept asking me, Chief, why don't you come join our church? I told them I'm Catholic, so that broke the conversation off real quick. But there was one Catholic church in the city. I did join it. And I also joined the Jacksonville Historical Society. I made myself available to meet all the clergy groups every weekend. For the first 4 months, I was never home, literally. And it's important for your new chief, whoever there is, to reach out and make contact and establish communication with all of your community groups, every one of them. So I did that in the first 4 months. And I tell you, I'm just grateful that that situation turned out the way it did. It could have turned out far worse. And I'm glad I kept open lines of communication, and I kept everything up front with the president and the vice president, NAACP, and we didn't have a problem at all. It was still a terrible event. Sorry that young man had to lose his life. I wish that judge had signed that petition so that young man could have possibly gotten the help he needed. It's always tragic when you lose a young person. 22 years old is just so young, and it's it was a tough thing. It was a tough thing for his family. It was tough for the officers involved. The officers involved were young officers themselves. And I would say that even today, they probably feel a lot of pain from that incident.
Are there any other follow-up questions? Okay, John, thank you. You can go back up to the HR office, and the team up there will give you further information.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And to the committee, just a couple of notes. We are running about 15 minutes ahead of our planned schedule. So we will begin the first mock news conference at 2:15. So you get a little bit of a break in here, and we'll get set up and ready to begin about 15 minutes ahead of our planned schedule.
Welcome back to our members of selection committee. We're now going to do our mock news interviews. So for each of these, each of the candidate has been given a scenario, which you have a copy of in your book. They've been given a short period of time to be getting ready for the news conference. They're going to have an opportunity when they come in to be offering, an initial statement or an initial account of what occurred. Then we have members of our media on both sides of me that are going to be asking them questions that are going to be pertaining to that interview. We're going to do the same application, the same scenario for all three applicants. At the end of this scenario, we're going to ask members of the media to be going up in the seats behind us to be giving insight into each candidate, those positives and those negatives that they were seeing. So you were able to hear directly from them on those positives, things that they saw. We kind of have you right in the middle between members of the media and the candidate so that you can get their direct interactions with them, and you can see that as well. Thank you very much.
Hi. Good morning. My name is Chief Stacy Kelly with the Fargo Police Department, and we're here at a press conference. I want to brief you on an incident that happened this morning. At 02:35 hours, we had two officers dispatched to 245 Everett Street in reference to a 911 call, and there was yelling inside heard over the 911 call. At 2:38, the line disconnected, and at 2:39, two of our officers arrived on scene and notified dispatch that there were shots fired. We've since found out that a 17-year-old male juvenile was shot. He was unconscious and breathing and transported to the hospital. He's in an unknown condition at this time, and his mother has also been transported to the hospital to be with him. Fargo Police Investigations and the Bureau of Criminal Investigations is on scene, and from my understanding, Bureau of Criminal Investigations will be taking lead on the investigation. Our thoughts and prayers are with the mother, this male, and the two officers that were involved in this incident. As a parent, my heart aches for her, for what she's going through right now. So I have complete sympathy for her. And then for our two officers that are involved, no police officer comes to work intending to discharge their firearm, much less at a male. So our thoughts and prayers are with all the parties involved, and I will take questions at this time.
I'm not sure if you were clear, but can you say, was it one of the officers that shot the juvenile?
Yes. Well, yes, officers informed dispatch that shots were fired.
So it was one of your officers that shot the juvenile?
That's the information I have right now. The only information I have is that shots were fired. So.
Do we know what led up to the disturbance?
No, I just we have information that it was a 911 call with yelling inside. That's what our officers responded to.
So the mother was on the scene. Does that mean the juvenile lived in the apartment building where this incident happened?
With it being a juvenile, I do not want to release name or information, anything of that nature right now.
Can you describe the nature of the disturbance? What was it besides yelling?
Yeah, only thing I know right now is that there was yelling inside. We're still very early in the scene. It's only 6 o'clock. This happened at 2:39. So as I get more information, we will provide it. But as right now, sorry, I don't have any further information.
What type of weapon did the juvenile have?
I do not know that right now.
Were any of your officers hurt?
No, all of the officers are fine.
Do we know who fired first?
No, I do not know right now. Like I said, as soon as this is an early investigation, as information comes, we will share what we can.
Were there any priors before with the juvenile?
Not to my knowledge.
Did the officers have body cams?
No.
Have you had calls to this residence in the past where you've had an experience similar or any experiences at this residence?
Yeah, as of right now, I don't have any history on the residents or calls.
Do you know if your officers followed all procedures?
At this point, the only thing I know is that the officers are all right and the juvenile is at the hospital, so it's very early in the investigation.
Who called because of the disturbance?
I just have that it's a 911 call from the apartment.
Can you describe the policy of when an officer shoots someone, especially a juvenile? Like, what does it take for an officer to fire a shot?
Well, juvenile really doesn't come into play, but an officer can discharge their firearm to protect their life or the life of another.
Who handles the investigation in terms of how the shooting went, whether it was warranted? Who handles that investigation?
So I've just been here 2 months, but from what I've been informed, BCI will take the lead on that investigation. And if I find out otherwise, I will make sure I correct you. That is my understanding at this point.
And, sorry, go ahead.
So none of the officers were injured in this incident. The juvenile and the mother were injured. Can you describe their injuries at all?
No, I'm sorry. The mother was not injured.
She was just transported.
Yeah, she was located, and our officers transported her to the hospital so she could be there with the juvenile. Sorry if that was misunderstood.
When it was reported to 911, what was said?
Nothing was said that I think was, the only thing I have was yelling from inside could be heard over the line. I don't have any details other than yelling.
Do we know how long those officers have been on the force? Like, are they rookie? Are they veterans? I mean, do we know
I
of it?
do not have any of that information right now. Sorry.
Have you spoken to the officers?
I have not. They were transported to the police headquarters.
Have you had other calls to this address in the past?
Not to my knowledge.
So since this is early in the investigation, when are you expecting your next update to be able to give us more information? And also, how is the best way for media to contact you to be able to do that before our next newscast?
Yes, if you can direct everything to our PIO, Public Information Officer, and I would think by this afternoon we would have a little more information as soon as I get some information. I don't want to call us back together to not be able to provide you anything. So as soon as I have something solid that I feel is pertinent and valuable to you, we will have another press conference. Our Public Information Officer will put out, keep you up to date.
Is the juvenile under supervision now?
I'm not been advised of that, but I would have to assume that he is.
Do we know his injuries?
No, unknown at this time.
You only said he's 17-year-old male. Do we know his race? Do we know his name?
I do not have the race of either officers or victim at this time.
Are the police officers going to be placed on administrative leave? Can you tell about the process?
Yes, it would be policy. I have to firm myself up on the Fargo policy, but it is normal for them to be put on administrative leave during this investigation. And at the next press conference, I will have the policy outlined, and I can give you a copy of that. So,
When you look at this case, as in any case of shooting, do you suspect, or is it the policy as you see it, or under your watch as chief, to have the police investigate themselves? Or will you basically turn everything over to BCI?
it's my understanding right now, and I will correct it later, that BCI handles all the investigations of this nature, so we will cooperate with them fully.
And Chief Kelly, that's what you're going to do during your watch as chief?
If that is our current policy, I see no reason to change it for a critical incident of this nature.
And you had mentioned the officers didn't have body cams. Is that something you're going to bring up for discussion? Like, why didn't it have body cams? Department doesn't have body cams, or just one turned on? Can you explain?
At this point, they do not have them. I know it is a priority to get body cameras, and as previous discussions have been said, that will be a priority placed on me to get them as soon as possible.
Who shot first?
I do not know at this time.
Chief, do you know, have you interviewed any witnesses where they've been able to provide information, or is there surveillance in that area that you're looking to?
As of this point right now, I don't have any details at all to share on that.
How are you going to engage with the community? Because a 17-year-old was shot, and we don't know his status, we don't know his race, we don't know his name, we don't know anything. How are you going to engage with the community that are going to have a lot of questions and going to point them towards us?
How am I going to give to the community?
Yeah, how are you going to engage with the
how am I
community and explain that a 17-year-old was shot?
So the only thing I can do is, share with you what I have right now and keep you updated as the information comes in. And I ask that the community understand it's very early in the investigation. I don't have all the details, they're still coming to light. So please have patience and allow the investigators to do their job. I have complete respect for BCI. I know they do a great job, and I'm sure everything will come to light soon.
Chief, it's a small community. And so, for officers to be involved in a shooting like this, it isn't going to take long for word to get out who those officers were. Is there any method and process? Is there any taken to protect those officers or their family?
As of right now, no, but this is something that we will notify. We will have them call their families. I'll make sure that they call their families as soon as possible to let them know that they're all right, along with all the officers that are on the shift right now, because like you said, word is going to get out that there was a shooting. So I'm going to ask that all of my officers call home to let them know they were not involved. We will work with the officers and prepare them to work with their family if their names are released for things that they can do and try to mitigate that, because like I said, this is not only is this a horrible incident for the mother and this child, but we have these officers that are going to be going through this and their family. So a lot of people are affected by this incident.
And maybe I missed this, but were these officers ever involved with a shooting before?
I do not know. I don't have that information.
How are your officers trained? Is firing or discharging a gun the last option for them, or how do you train them?
Well, I wouldn't say it's a last option. It's, they meet force with force, so I could get the training curriculum and provide it to you.
Are there any sustained complaints against these officers or anything in their personal files?
I don't have that right now, sorry.
Where was the juvenile shot? Where on him?
Yeah, I do not know.
Is there anything you do know about the shooting?
No, unfortunately, I've, like I said, I've shared all the information that I have with you right now. I wanted to make sure that we got the information out as quick as possible so that things weren't, so the gaps weren't filled in and things were made up. So I'll provide you as much as I can, as quick as I can.
Is there anything happening in that neighborhood right now as far as an investigation or neighbors need to look out for?
Our investigators are still on scene, en route to the scene, so if we need anything, we will get it publicized.
When will you make yourself available again? I realize you were saying that when you get more information, but you have an information officer, you have access to the officers. When are we going to know more?
Yeah. Like I said, as soon as I have information, I don't want to waste your time. Feel free to call me, through the PIO, we can talk, but as soon as I get more information, we will schedule another press conference and get the information out to everyone as soon as we can.
Will we have access to the officers?
To the officers, no.
We have about 1.5 minutes left, so if members of the media each have one last question apiece for the chief.
This was at 2:30 in the morning. I see 2 officers responding. Do you usually have 2 officers respond at that time of day, or is it usually just 1 officer on duty at that time?
I am not 100% familiar with all of our procedures, but it is not, I would say, based on my experience, it's not uncommon for 2 officers to respond to a call of an unknown disturbance at 2:30 in the morning.
Is there anything you're able to tell us about the juvenile?
No, not
Bes-
right now.
okay.
I just don't have any further information to share.
Okay.
Was alcohol or drugs involved?
Nothing like that has been brought to my attention yet.
Is he gonna face any charges as juvenile?
It is too early to answer that. We'll need to let the investigation work its course.
Okay, Chief, anything else you would like to say to members of the media as last comment?
Again, I would just ask that you stress, ask that the citizens give us time to do our job, do a thorough investigation, and I will keep you up to date with as much information as I can.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, members of the media.
All right, thank you.
We're interviewed by our press, a little different energy.
We ready? Okay. Good afternoon. I've been informed that at 2:35 this morning, 2 Fargo Police Department officers responded to a call of disturbance at 245 Everett, apartment 214. Dispatchers had related to the officers that they heard distinct screaming in the background before the call was disconnected. Upon arrival, the officers entered the hallway where they were confronted by a male subject brandishing a handgun. A gunfire was exchanged between the officers and the armed male who was wounded in the exchange of gunfire. The wounded suspect was discovered to be a juvenile who was transported to a local hospital. We are not releasing the name of the juvenile arrestee at this time. His mother's been notified, and she's been transported by officers to the hospital where her son is being treated for his injuries. The condition of the youth is unknown at this time. The involved officers were not wounded during the exchange of gunfire with the suspect. Fargo PD detectives are assisting the Bureau of Criminal Investigations in a follow-up related to the shooting. Residents of the apartment complex had assisted the officers in identifying the identity of the wounded youth who's involved in the shooting. Are there any questions?
Can you explain your last statement there? You said people in the apartment helped identify the juvenile?
Yes, we didn't know his identity. The residents there identified him.
So
told
are
us
you
who he
saying
was.
he lived in the apartment?
No, I didn't say that. I said they identified it. They gave us his identity.
Okay.
Chief Franklin, you did say he was arrested. What charges was he
He is in
arrested?
custody. Charges are pending. I don't have the charges at this time. When I have that information, I'll be glad to release that to you.
Are you able to share any information on the juvenile? I know you're limited with him being a juvenile. Age,
No.
any of that?
He's 17. That's all I can tell you.
Besides the age, okay.
How about the officers involved? How long were they on the force?
I don't have that information at present. I can provide that to you later when I get further details, sir.
Who fired first?
That is unclear at this time.
Chief, have you been involved ever before? I know that you're new to the Fargo force. Have you ever been involved with or had officers that you supervised involved with the shooting?
Yes, several times.
And what was the stance then? Are these officers on leave for the time, or how are you dealing with the officers?
As of right now, they would be considered to be on paid administrative leave, yes, sir.
Should people in that area be concerned for their safety?
No, I don't think so at this time, no, sir.
Isolated incident?
Appears to be.
Is there anything you can say about the disturbance itself besides the 911 call was disconnected, yelling in the background? Any other description you have of what led officers to the scene?
That's all I have at this time. They responded to a call. Dispatchers related they heard yelling in the background before the call got disconnected.
Do you have the suspect that's at the hospital under supervision, surveillance?
You mean is an officer there with him?
Is an officer with him?
Yes, he is.
Can you tell us about the policy the Fargo Police Department has when engaging in gunfire?
What I can tell you is that they are going to be debriefed by the Bureau of Criminal Investigations, who will take over the investigation with assistance from the Fargo PD detectives. And I would assume it's going to be standard procedure. Their guns will be inventoried. They'll eventually give a statement after consulting with their FOP representatives.
No, I was curious. Can you tell me like what the policy is whenever one of your officers engages with someone? Because here we have a 17-year-old. We know you're not releasing his condition. You're not telling us, his name. You're not giving us any information. I want to know what does it
I
take
don't
when your
have this
officers
condition,
fire?
sir. All I can tell you is that he's 17. He's a juvenile. He has protections under the law, so I can't reveal any more about his identity than what I've given you.
So can you tell me the policy?
I don't have the policy in front of me, sir.
Is this a juvenile you've had issues with in the past?
Pardon me?
Is this a juvenile you've had issues with in the past?
I do not have his arrest history in front of me at this time, sir. But getting back to you, sir, when I get a hold of that policy, I'll be glad to relay it to you.
Have you spoken to the officers?
I have not.
Do you guys have any body cams?
As of present, right now in Fargo PD, no, we do not have body cams.
Should you have?
Well, we're working on that. That will occur sometime in the future. We will definitely have them in the
I
future.
guess, Chief, what I'm asking is your opinion. Should you have?
I can't say what a previous chief should or should not have done. I will say as the current chief, we will have them.
Do you know, was there any opportunity for surveillance video in that area that you might be looking to?
I would imagine our detectives and the Bureau of, the Bureau of Criminal Investigations are looking into any possible video, home or hallway that they could obtain to use as evidence.
Do you know anything about the relationship of what that juvenile was doing in that apartment building and what relationship he may have had to who made the 911 call?
I don't have that information available at this time, ma'am.
Chief Franklin, it's a small town. By now, a lot of people know who was involved in the shooting from your force. What steps have you taken there for their family, for themselves?
I'm sorry, repeat the question, sir.
What I'm saying is this is a small community, so most people in this community already know what officers were involved.
Yes, sir.
So what steps are you taking either to protect them, their family, if there's an incident here?
We will ensure that those officers receive protections that they need if we feel that their families are threatened or in danger.
Do you know if any of these officers have sustained complaints in their files?
I couldn't tell you that, sir, because I don't know the identity of the officers at this time.
Oh, you don't know? I thought you
I haven't
know as a
spoken to the
chief.
officers. I don't know who's actually involved at this time.
What is your policy regarding rumors going around on social media about what happened?
Excuse me, our social media policy, officers are not going to discuss it on social
But
media.
for people in the community talking about what happened?
I
there's
can't control
rumors
what the people in the community choose
And no
to
response from the police to the rumors?
do. No, we're not going to respond to social media rumors.
How about incident reports being submitted out through social media?
Incident reports, we'll make them available to you if you want them.
But as far as putting them out on Facebook or Twitter, is that going
No,
to be a primary effort?
No, ma'am, I don't see us putting actual police reports out on social media, but they'll be available to you once we get all the paperwork properly filed and authorized.
How about backing up from police reports, but just incident reports or explaining an incident, a high area of officers in an area that would be around this Everett Street area this morning?
I'm sorry, would you repeat the question?
The Everett Street area probably has a lot of officers in it as you investigate the shooting this morning. Would that be a priority of the Fargo Police Department to put out this incident on social media to alert the public? Is that going to be
Well,
a
we
tool
don't,
used?
we don't perceive there's a threat to the public at this time. It appears to be an isolated incident. So there'd be no need to to draw an alarm to that area. We'll put something out on our Fargo Police Department social media page informing the public that there was a police shooting early this morning there. But we're not going to say much more than that. But again, he's a juvenile, so we had to protect his identity too. And as you understand, everybody's presumed innocent before trial. So,
Chief Franklin, you said earlier that you've been involved in a shooting before or with a force where you know people that have been involved before. Is that in any way going to play a role in all this as you speak to the officers?
I haven't spoken to them yet, but we'll be talking to them about what happened. We'll get their signed statements, and it'll just be a routine investigation conducted by our detectives in association with the Bureau of Criminal Investigation.
I guess my point in asking that question, though, is because of the community itself, or any community, they're going to judge whether or not force was needed. And so, as somebody who has been around this type of thing before, is it right that you investigate your own force, or are you going to leave all that up to BCI?
Well, we will assist them. We're holding down the crimes until they arrive. We have to make sure the evidence has been preserved until they arrive on the scene and take it over.
Do you know how many shootings have been in Fargo so far this year?
I wish I could tell you that, sir. I don't have that information available right now.
We got a news tip that the 17-year-old that was involved, his name is John Smith. Can you confirm that?
I will not confirm that.
Can you tell us when is the expected timeline for when you could release more information? How the best way is for us to ask you questions, if that's available?
I have a public information officer. You can contact her probably sometime later today, and she should have most of the facts available, or contact my office. But once I have something available more to pass on to you that can be verified, I'll be glad to pass it on to you myself.
Isn't there a policy or a state law that you have to release identity of officers that are involved in a shooting within 24 hours?
I'm not aware of that policy, sir. But once I find out about it, if that is a policy, you'll have that information when it's time to release it.
Was Moorhead involved? Was Cass County involved?
Sir, no. It's all involved. Everybody involved was Fargo PD officers.
You know, you just started about 2 months ago, and now you have a shooting on your hands of a 17-year-old. I mean, should we trust you to clean up Fargo streets? I mean, can we really trust you?
I'm sorry, sir. Can I get your last name?
Joshua Piguero.
Mr. Pierre?
Piguero.
Mr. Piguero?
Yeah.
Officers were involved in a shooting with a 17-year-old armed male suspect in a hallway.
I guess I don't understand.
Yeah, I'm confused.
You said, should you trust the police?
No, should we trust you? I'm not saying you trust the police. Should we trust
okay.
you? You've just been in this job 2 months and it's already a shooting.
Why would you not trust me?
That's a question I'm asking, sir. Should we trust you as
Why
a
not?
community?
Why not? What reason would I have to come here and give you anything other than the truth?
Were drugs or alcohol involved?
I can't say at present. I don't know enough about the investigation to release that information.
Well, as chief, where do you stand on transparency with the department? Do you feel like the public is getting enough information? Are you limiting the information you want to give out?
Well, obviously, I'm limiting the information on the suspect himself. As we get more details available that can be verified, we'll be releasing all of it to the media. If there's any video footage, once we can observe it, look at it, review it, it'll be released to you as well.
Any other information about the disturbance you're able to release to us at this point in the investigation?
No, ma'am, other than the fact that when the officers got on the hallway, they observed a male subject standing there brandishing a handgun.
And what led to the gunfire?
I can't say at this time.
We have about 1.5 minutes left, so if each member of the media has one question.
Do you know what school the suspect went to?
No, I do not.
Were you able to talk to the mother? You said she was transported.
No, I have had no contact with the mother at this time. Once we determined who he was, officers were dispatched to the youth's house, notified the mother, and transported her directly to the hospital so she could be with her son.
She wasn't on scene. She
No,
was.
not at all.
You've been in this situation in the past in your career. How does this
have.
affect the officer's psyche?
Well, officers obviously are traumatized. They may wish to see the department psychiatrist, psychologist. They'll probably want to see a therapist. We have, through our employee assistance program, we have therapists available to talk to them if they feel the need. And more than likely, they're going to have a debrief with a therapist at least once.
Okay, Chief, any last comments from members of the media?
I wanted to point out that none of the officers were wounded in this exchange of gunfire, and they seem to be okay at this time. Okay.
That sounds good, Chief. Thank you very much.
Okay,
Thank you,
thank
Christian
you.
Media.
And again, once I get more information available, I'll be glad to pass it on to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All set? Good morning. I'm Chief David Zabalski, Fargo Police Department. This morning at about 2:35 a.m., two of our officers were sent to a disturbance inside an apartment building at 245 Everett Street in the city of Fargo. While en route, they were updated by the dispatchers that they received a 911 call in which they could hear yelling in the background and the call was disconnected. The officers arrived at approximately 2:38 a.m. and at approximately 2:39 a.m. informed dispatch that shots had been fired. Exchange of gunfire had occurred and a 17-year-old male was shot. That individual has been conveyed to a local hospital. His condition is unknown at this time, and none of our officers were injured in the incident. Pursuant to our department policy, the North Dakota Bureau of Criminal Investigation has responded to the scene to conduct an independent investigation of the shooting. The results of that investigation will be turned over to our state's attorney, Birch Burdick, for review in determining whether or not the officer's use of force was justified. Subsequent to that investigation, our department will also conduct an administrative review and, if necessary, an internal investigation relevant to any potential policy or internal violations that may have occurred. At this point, we don't have the details of the underlying offense or what led up to the exchange of gunfire, and that's essentially all the information we have at this very early stage. And I would also caution you that in many instances, when it's so early in the investigation, new information will come to light and more details will come forward. We will provide the community with an update later this afternoon once more is known and we're able to confer with the North Dakota PCI. I'll take any questions.
Running with the police before?
The ethnicity of the juvenile, black male, 17-year-old juvenile.
Do we
Is
know
there
who
any-
fired for? Oh, no,
Is there anything else you can tell us about the disturbance besides the yelling in the background?
Yeah, not at this time. We don't know what the underlying incident was. We don't know if this juvenile was involved in that incident or if was some way connected to the person in the apartment until the investigators are able to get some more information.
do we know who fired first?
No, we do not.
Was there any investigation done on whether or not the 911 call was legitimate?
This happened in a very dynamic, short time span. In terms of verifying 911 calls, that's really not generally something the officers would do unless they thought there was something suspicious about the call. This was a legitimate dispatch to our officers through our Red River 911 Dispatch Center. And they also followed up with the officers indicating that they had heard yelling and a disconnected phone. So within a minute of entering that building, the officers, there was some type of confrontation and an exchange of gunfire.
Do you have the injured youth being guarded now or being watched now?
We have officers at the hospital, and ultimately the Bureau of Criminal Investigation will, I'm sure, be interviewing him. And our officers are pursuant to our policy, are at police headquarters. Our department, of course, will cooperate fully with the Bureau of Criminal Investigation investigation, and we'll have more details as they unfold.
But
You had mentioned that the 17-year-old was black, right?
Yes.
Do we know, like, are there any sort of like racial biases training that your officers have had, those that were involved in the shooting, that maybe they might have acted more aggressive because he was a person of color? Do your officers go through that training? These two in particular?
Sure. Well, in a situation like this, as in any incident, I think it would be very speculative to attempt to comment on what actually happened in this incident without any details. I can tell you that our department recently has gone through implicit bias training with a national instructor, a professor out of Morehouse College, who has trained officers all across the United States to help not only officers but others identify their implicit bias and make sure that it doesn't interfere with their decision making. I would say that based on the short time span from entering the building to the shots being fired, that there was some very dynamic conflict that occurred. And again, until we know more about it, it's really hard to provide any more details.
What race were the other officers? And just to follow up to that, is anything in their file?
At this point, we haven't had the opportunity to review prior personnel conduct of these officers. Their race is a white male and a black male officer, which again is, in terms of our department response, at this point, doesn't have anything to do with the details of the incident itself. We will do an investigation once the criminal investigation is completed and make sure that policy was followed and that training was followed. At this point, we're waiting to see on the condition of the youth and the initial details of the investigation.
Chief, back to the suspect for a moment. Is he from Fargo and is he known to the department?
The person who was shot is from Fargo. I have not had the opportunity yet to get information on his background, but certainly we can research that as well. And I would also caution that we'll need to consult with the Bureau of Criminal Investigation before we give out details about the rest of more details about folks involved in this incident, as it may affect the integrity of their investigation.
You know, you were newly hired to the job, right? You just started as chief. Have you at all dealt with something similar in your previous position? And I ask because the selection committee, when they were trying to hire you, thought that this job, that this might have been too much of that this department might be too big for you. Like, can you handle this?
Yes, actually, I spent 27 years at Milwaukee Police Department investigating and supervising officer-involved shootings, and I have trained the investigation of officer-involved critical incidents across the state of Wisconsin for several years, leading up to the state's implementation of their officer-involved death law in 2014, 2015, roughly. In addition, as chief of the Beloit Police Department, we had an officer-involved shooting December 10th of 2019, in which our officers were placed in the untenable position of having to use deadly force against an armed individual.
Chief, were the officers wearing body cams? And if not, do you feel that body cams are needed?
At this point, we have not had the opportunity to purchase and deploy body cameras. I believe it is an important component, especially in situations like this, because oftentimes it provides an additional view of what occurred. But unfortunately, at this early stage in my tenure, we do not have them in the field yet.
Should they be mandatory?
Body cams? Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, I'm full agreement on that.
Are you able to describe the relationship of the juvenile to the apartment building, what he was doing there, or to the person who made the 911 call?
Yeah, we don't know that at this time.
How about what led up to the juvenile brandishing a handgun to shots being fired?
We don't know those details yet.
How about the interaction with the mother? If my son was shot, I know what my wife would do. So I guess I'm asking, was there any conflict with the mother? How was that handled?
No, the mother was located. She's also at the hospital with the 17-year-old, and our officers are there as well. I'm sure Bureau of Criminal Investigation personnel will also be responding there as part of their investigation.
Chief, I just want to tell you, we've been getting these Facebook messages from family and friends saying that he was shot because he was black. That we've been getting all these messages, we're getting calls to the newsroom. What do you want to tell those who say they were shot because of his race? He was shot because of his race.
Well, I think at this stage of the game, it's irresponsible to comment in that fashion. I understand that people may have an initial emotional reaction because of the environment that we live in today. But we've worked very hard on this department to build community support and community trust. And I would ask our community to provide us a goodwill assumption that this investigation will be conducted thoroughly and independently by the Bureau of Criminal Investigation, after which we'll also do our internal administrative review and identify if there were any policy violations and take appropriate action. On the other hand, I think we have to recognize that these incidents are traumatic for our law enforcement officers as well. And so until we know the details of the incident, I think we need to forego judgment.
What school does he go to?
I do not have that information.
Kind of piggybacking on what Joshua had said about social media, what is your stance on either responding to some of those speculations about the incidents on social media or using that as a source for releasing information as a police department?
I agree. I think that is a good source for our PIO, and she's involved in these conversations, and she has the information that I'm providing you now so that she can effectively respond and try and put what we know to be accurate information at this time, and at least allow for the benefit of an independent investigation and the benefit from our community that regardless of what the outcome is, we will take appropriate action and hold our officers accountable. And if there's a criminal act on the part of this individual, he'll be held accountable as well.
Can you explain how, like, your officers, like, now that they went through this experience, are they going to go see a therapist? Is there counseling involved? And do you know when's the last time they had a site eval?
Sure. Our policy allows for and encourages we have a critical incident debrief process in which the whole group of officers, even our dispatchers, fire department personnel who may have been involved in a critical incident such as this, meet as a group with our police psychologist to debrief the incident. That usually occurs within the first week after the incident. That is a confidential, private session for their personal mental well-being. It's not part of any investigation or department internal operation. It's just part of our policy. Also, as part of our policy, the officers will be placed on administrative leave until the criminal investigation is completed. After the criminal investigation is completed, they will also, before returning to duty, are required to have a one-on-one with the police psychologist to evaluate their status to return to duty to see if there's any lingering issues or PTSD as a result of the issue. And then again, before hitting the streets, would also be provided a new firearm as the one involved would obviously be evidence and ensure proficiency with that weapon on the range before we would put them back out on the street.
Going back to what Kirsten just said, which is social media, we've got, with what the community just went through, obviously all nerves are somewhat raw. Social media is going nuts that this was this was about race. When are you going to put out that fire? How quick are we going to find out the information, or are they left to assume that there is a problem?
Well, I don't think your question is premised well because I can't offset assumptions. I can only provide you information. And as I've relayed the races of the individuals involved, there's no valid way for us to comment or speculate about what any of the motivations were. So I think that's completely premature, and I would caution people from jumping to those conclusions because until we have the details, the facts have not come out on that, and I think that is really not a healthy response. I understand that people in the community will have an emotional reaction to any police shooting, especially if there's a minority member involved. But we have to be in a place where we allow for the independent investigation to come out. We are certainly more than willing to provide information and details as we can that won't affect the integrity of that investigation, and take any appropriate actions that are necessary if there was any issues on the part of the officers, and just as if there's criminal activity on the part of the individual involved, we'll take appropriate action on that as well. But we really need to wait for the Bureau of Criminal Investigation to work through the details. And those facts that you speak of will be more known and more relevant, I think, upon the completion of their investigation and when they have given the go-ahead to provide certain details about that investigation. There may be other witnesses that they have to interview, et cetera.
Are you fearful at all that the community can't wait that long?
I think that our community, we've worked very hard on building relationships with them and support and trust, and I think that while they may have an initial emotional reaction, that they are in a position to give us the benefit of that doubt and wait and see how the details pan out before they jump to a conclusion that may be incomplete. I think anytime something like this happens in a community, there's a very visceral reaction, and the public safety of our community and the sanctity of our relationships with each other are very important. And I think we've shown in the early stages of my tenure our sincere interest in outreach and building relations with neighborhoods throughout our community.
You had mentioned that one of the officers that was involved is black, right?
Yes.
How many black officers or officers of color you have? Because I haven't seen many.
Right. We have 3 African Americans within the department, and we are in the process of a concerted effort to diversify our department. That's another goal of the department under my tenure. So we're working with a new assessment and recruitment team to target diverse criminal justice programs. And we have also reached out as part of our discussions with our local associations and neighborhood groups and asking them to assist us as members of the minority community and people that have a sincere interest in diversifying the department. They are best suited to help the department recruit interested persons, interested minority candidates into the department so that we can help to diminish the perception of the department in terms of its view of different neighborhoods and different communities. So that's a big piece of the diversification pie, and we were appreciative of the initial efforts on their part to work with us and try and do that.
Okay, Chief, thank you. For members of the media, we have about a minute and a half left, so if you each have one question for the Chief.
I want to get back to this case quick. If it's discovered that the weapon that the juvenile had was fake and the officers still shot the juvenile, what kind of process do you go through for those officers?
Well, it's the criminal investigation will be the same. In reality, it doesn't matter if the gun was fake or real from the perception of the officer, depending on the details. Again, we don't know the details. But I've seen these incidents many times before, and certainly in situations where an officer believes there is a legitimate threat to their safety, to their life, and they have to use deadly force, and they find out later that what they thought was a real gun is not a real gun, is extremely traumatic for them. Some of those officers don't come back to work, ever. And also taking into consideration and understanding how this affects the family of that juvenile. So again, we'll have to wait and see what the details are, and it's a little premature to go any further on it until we know those details. The investigation and the scrutiny of it would be the same.
Do you know the officers at all called out to the teen and dropped the weapon? Were there any calls that they consider using a taser or shooting with a rubber bullet? Like, why shoot him with an actual gun?
Yeah, don't have those details at this point. I would say in general, a taser is a less lethal weapon, and if you're faced with a lethal weapon, the officer would use lethal force to defend themselves.
Can you tell me when you expect us to be able to learn more information, and what is the best way for us to contact you to ask you questions as our newscasts come up throughout the day?
Sure. I've been in contact briefly with the PCI Bureau Chief who's supervising the investigation. We anticipate a press brief by 4 p.m. this afternoon. Our PIO will reach out to all of the media and let them know when and where, and we'll provide any updated information that, under their purview, they believe is appropriate. So we will tell you as much as we can. If some of the information has changed, and that is not unusual in these types of situations, especially early on, we will let you know that as well. So I think later this afternoon, we'll be able to tell you more.
Chief, you know that one of the officers was black. You know the other one was white. Can you tell us which one shot him? And if not, somebody talk to you about who they are. Why can't you?
Why can't I tell
Why
you who
can't you
shot?
tell us which officer shot him?
I don't know which officer shot, and that's part of the criminal investigation.
Thank you, Chief. Do you have any last comment for members of the media before the press conference?
No, I appreciate the media's interest in this, and again, I thank our community for their initial response. I understand the emotional trauma that this causes in the community, and we at the Fargo Police Department greatly appreciate their ability to allow us and to allow the Bureau of Criminal Investigation to conduct this independent investigation and await the results before there is judgment one way or the other. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you very much, members of the media. If you want to come up to your places in the podium, that'd be great. Do you want to come take this off, Ty? All right, so members of the committee, what we're now going to ask each member of the media to do, we're going to go left to right, so we'll start with Joshua. We're going to go through our list of candidates. Each member of the media will be asked to make their comments on each candidate one by one. So we'll go through our first candidate. We'll ask each member of the media for any comments, those positive, negative observations, etc. Go through all three, and then at the end, we'll ask members of the media to be answering any questions that any of you may have for any members of the media. So, Joshua, Joel, Kirsten, and TJ, your comments on the first candidate, Chief Stacy Kelly. Do you want to start, Joshua, please?
Yeah, so I would say Stacy Kelly, he was very calm. He stood upright, which is good. He wasn't slouching. He wasn't combative at all. He didn't insert himself in there. He was very stale, and he didn't release that many information at first. Like, we had to get it out of him, as opposed to the other two candidates who just said, "Oh yeah, there was an officer was shot. They gave us the race." Like, it felt like, you were picking at him to say, "Hey, can you just give me more information?" And it just helps when they're upfront about it. He provided short answers. And that's about. I mean, there was one point it looks like he was sweating. I don't know what it was, but yeah, he was not emotional, and he talked very calm and measured, at least that's my view.
Thank you, Joshua. Joel?
I got a quick question for you, Greg. Was there more information given to them than us?
Yes.
Okay, well, then it explains some of why they were giving more information. I thought he was incredibly honest about the fact he didn't know. He was very honest about how he didn't know. I thought he handled that well throughout the whole thing. He didn't get agitated later in the press conference. And I think in terms of the information that we all tried to get out of him, everything that we shouldn't have been able to get out of him, we didn't.
Okay, thank you. Kirsten?
I have to say, I believe he is the most emotional of the three candidates, talking about when the mom was invited to be transported with her son and talking about being a parent, bringing that to the forefront. He was probably the most emotional about that part of it. He did make a mistake he was questioned about what kind of weapon the juvenile had. That was released as a handgun. He said he didn't know. So just kind of, I think even in his first account of it, he said a handgun, and then when it was questioned secondhand, didn't remember that. He was honest about not having all the information. Was open to giving us more information later, which as media members we definitely appreciate. But yeah, was the most limited probably and seemed least comfortable in a press conference situation of the three candidates to me.
Thank you. TJ?
Yeah, I found him to be very transparent. Everything we asked him, he pretty much answered. I didn't feel intimidated talking to him at all. I know sometimes some of these chiefs, you try to talk to him and it's like, ooh, sorry I asked that question, but he seemed to answer all of them. I also wrote down the part about him talking about how the mom was doing. I thought that had a decent touch to the whole discussion of what was going on as well.
Thank you. Candidate 2, Chief John Franklin. We're going to start this time with Kirsten.
I thought he was the most confident at the podium of the three, maybe a little more adversarial in his relationship with the press, which I think translated into probably us peppering him harder with questions even than the other two. He didn't mention anything about race. I think the only candidate who did actually was our last candidate. And was limited with the information too, but was open to giving us more later. Seemed like social media was not a primary tool for him and his department, as opposed to the other candidates who mentioned that as using that as a way to communicate with the public, but was still transparent and getting us information.
Thank you. Joel?
I think Fargo media is actually pretty kind. They don't get up in their grill a whole lot. When we did a little bit, just to see how far we could push, he got ornery. And so when you do that, it's going to get worse as it goes, as Kirsten said. And so it was pretty obvious to tell at the end of the interview, he was getting tired of us. What I really liked was that he wasn't ambivalent at all about whether or not body cam should be used, which I took as a really good sign in the sense that he wasn't in full protection mode. He was like, you bet, we need this.
Thank you. Joshua?
Yeah, I found them very combative as opposed to the other two candidates. And I mean, like when I asked him, hey, should we trust you? And he he asked me a question like that's like the soundbite, the lead for 5 o'clock. I could just see it. We asked the chief whether we should trust him, and this is his response. And then you get an email follow-up, hey, why did you play that soundbite? I was like, well, you said it. And then, and also he was very upfront about not releasing the juvenile's name or identity, which is good. I mean, he is a minor, so he didn't allow too much information to go out there. Yeah, he seemed very confident in his answers, like he knew what he was talking about. He stuck to his guns, even though he couldn't cite policy when I said, hey, can you, give me a specific policy? But he was the first, without even, I don't think any of us asked him about saying that they're going to debrief with a therapist. So it seems like he had the officer's mental health in mind. So,
TJ?
You can definitely tell he comes from a big city police department. A little rough at times, to me at least. His answers are very short. Didn't want to expound on anything we were asking him. Very limited information. And I think coming to a smaller community like this, people expect to hear more from their chief about what's going on and not seem like they're trying to hide some of the information. So I found that to be a little off-putting with him.
Thank you, TJ. Our last candidate, Chief David Zabalski. This time we'll start with TJ.
Mr. Zabalski did a very good job of explaining everything that we were asking him. At times, to me, a little bit too much in depth. I found myself kind of trailing off. There's a difference between being very short with your answers and then expounding for a while, especially when you have a 6 a.m. press conference and you've got to get information on the air as soon as you possibly can. So, but other than that, he seemed, to know all of his facts. He gave good responses to everything we asked him about training and body cams. Overall, I thought he did well.
Thank you. Joel?
He got short at the end too. He did. He got to the point where when you asked him about the issues involving race, involving, if you know that one is black and you know that one is white and you want to keep the fire from starting up in the community, it seems to me that you should be willing to talk more at the steps you're going to take to try to play into what's already happening on social media. It's a small community. I mean, Fargo's a small community. By the time this hit, a lot of people in town know exactly who was involved in the shooting. The other thing, and I guess I would add this on all of them, Greg, is that you know, you can go up there and by the time you're holding a press conference, you're going to have information. I mean, you're going to have information. And so if you wait for the answer, none of us are going to put that on the news. And if you're quick to answer and you're combative, that ends up on the news.
Thank you. Joshua?
I took down a few notes. He was very transparent and upfront, like releasing the race. He also went into police protocol. He gave a lot of information. He talked about implicit bias training. He, said that the community, he talked about like it seemed like he had the pulse on what's going on in the country right now, just talking about the environment. Like, he just seemed very engaged. He kind of went on and trailed for a little bit, so it'd be hard to get a soundbite. But I mean, he's a police chief, he's not a politician, so sometimes it's like, yeah, it is what it is.
Thank you. And Kirsten?
No offense to the politicians in the room, maybe. You might want to add that, I don't know. He was by far the most transparent of the three candidates to me. When he laid out the scenario and we had less information than they had, it was clear he wanted us to know what he knew. And it felt like when he got done at the podium that we did know everything that he knows. And I didn't necessarily feel that with the other two candidates. Race, of course, is probably the highlight of that he was open about that right from the get-go, answered questions about it. He also seemed very knowledgeable about our community, dropping Birch Burdick's name, talking about diversifying the department and knowing the number of officers of color who are in the department, which I thought was impressive. I do agree, maybe for a press conference on breaking news, and this is breaking news, it happened several hours ago, might have gotten a little more in-depth than we tend to do at that time of day. But yeah, I definitely felt like he was transparent, that he was open to giving us more information when he had it, and also engaged with what we were talking about.
Okay, thank you very much. Members of the selection committee, any individual questions, members of the media? Jason, you're up first.
So just about the procedure, there was no indication of the race of the victim in what we got. Is that correct? Is that something that Zabalski just inserted on his own?
That was my other question, because he was the only one that brought up the race of the suspect. The other two did not at all. So I don't know if he was told that information and we were not.
I thought it was brilliant. I mean, it gave y'all more to like sink your teeth into.
Yeah.
More to talk about. So I was just wondering, is that?
And I'm going to look at human resources. The information I believe that each candidate was given to prepare is the same copy that you were given in your book. Is that correct, Jill?
Yes, they all received the same information to prepare for the news conference. The race of the juvenile, as well as the race of the officers, was not included. That said, this is a mock news conference, so they do have some leeway to to provide information that they may add to this scenario. But the race was not included, either of the juvenile or the officers.
Thank you, Jill.
Thanks.
Next question from the committee. Anything? Okay, for members of the media, we appreciate your involvement. As we talked about when we asked you to be a part of this, the relationship of our next chief to the community and that conduit is largely through the media is critically important. And your role in interviewing him in great experiences and ones that are more challenging will be very important as he succeeds in this role. So we appreciate your involvement and your discussion with our committee. Thank you very much.
For inviting
Thanks for having us.
Thanks. Thank you.
For the committee members, we will take about a 10-plus minute break as you complete your scoring. Please remember to turn in your score sheets to Jennifer so we can continue compiling the scores. And if you can please be in your chairs by about 3:28, we'll begin the candidate discussion right at 3:30. Thank you. All right. Well, gentlemen, we've reached the final component of the assessment day. We've enjoyed getting to know more about each of you. And this last portion of the assessment, the candidate discussion, is really intended to simulate 3 police chiefs discussing law enforcement topics. This is also sometimes referred to as a leaderless group. So we have provided you with copies of the 3 topics. They're written as questions, and it will be up to the 3 of you to determine who will begin the conversation on each topic. We have approximately 15 minutes for each topic, but if you complete a topic early, we'll have you just roll to that next topic. Again, we will not be facilitating this candidate discussion. This truly occurs between the 3 of you, as if you were 3 police chiefs just visiting about these topics. Do you have any questions before we begin?
No.
No, ma'am.
Okay, very good. And you can begin.
I go in order. 1, 2, 3.
Sure, go ahead.
Regarding number 1, should I read the question off or just go into it?
You may read the question if
Okay,
you wish.
I'll read it off. Some progress has been made to reduce the stigma of mental health issues. As the chief, how do you handle the challenge creating a culture of support that normalizes officers and civilian staff seeking help for mental health issues? How do you monitor the individual and overall mental health status of your workforce? Okay, I will relate a personal experience one of my officers had. He got into a shooting out in Jacksonville, and of course, we gave him paid administrative leave off. And he called me one night, and I said, "Hey, what's going on?" He said, his name was Ryan. He said, "Chief, I'm only supposed to have 2 weeks off, but I'm just not ready." I said, "Well, Ryan, that's not a problem. You can take all the time you want." He said, "Really? I know the guys are dependent on me." I said, "Ryan, we will manage. What means most to me is that you come back when you're ready to assume the duties of a lieutenant." I said, "So you take the time off you need." He said, "I'd like to go back and see the therapist again." I said, "Ryan, I can arrange that tomorrow." He said, "Really?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Just tell me what you need, Ryan. I don't want you to come back until you're ready. You've been through a traumatic incident." And I went to all my roll calls to talk about it later on that day as the day went on, because I want to make sure all the officers understood there's no exact timetable on when to come back from a traumatic incident like that. I want them to take the time to come back when they're ready to resume their duties. And I realize dealing with trauma is different for different people. Everybody doesn't bounce back in a week, 2 weeks, a day, a month. I understand that. And I want to make sure everybody in the department understood that. And I think it made a difference with our officers reaching out to our employee assistance program, because several officers did reach out to our employee assistance program right after that I think probably wouldn't have done it had I not brought that subject up at roll call.
I agree, talking about it, making sure that there's nothing negative associated with it. And this is another job, a lot of things come down to our first line supervisors. They're the ones that are in contact with the officers every day, and they need to monitor them, and they need to stand up and make those tough calls and say, "Hey, we need to get them some help," or because they know them a lot better than we do. And then I like what you said about, as the command staff, verbalizing it and being out there to support. If the chief and the command staff isn't supporting it, then it makes it even harder for those supervisors to stand up and do that. So, yeah, I think it's really up to the people who know them.
Yep, absolutely. Couldn't agree more with that. And following our officer-involved shooting last year, we had 3 officers actually involved in the shooting itself. We went out to roll calls and talked to the officers about these types of critical incidents, and specifically, again, going forward with the supervisors and letting them know that it's really their responsibility to watch these officers when they come back. Now, obviously, they're on administrative leave for a while, and prior to that, I met individually with them just to make sure that they were okay after the traumatic event itself, which I think is very important. I think the cops like to see, even though I'm limited because the investigation's turned over to another agency, the fact that the chief's out there making sure that they're okay regardless of the investigative outcome. And also that it is okay for them to have a different experience. So we allow for administrative leave based on individual needs. And having that conversation with them, I think, was very fruitful. And 3 different people had 3 different experiences. Part of the investigative process, I think, that also leads to some of the stress in these situations is the policies or procedures. And in this particular situation, the officers did not have to make a statement for 48 hours. That was the state policy in the investigation. I know from my personal experience doing hundreds of these in Milwaukee that, and at that time, we would take a statement right away with the understanding that you will remember more later.
Right.
And a lot of officers really want to tell what happened from their perspective right now while they remember it, again, with the understanding that a night's sleep might help your memory, and that's okay. So one of the officers, after having this discussion, I said, look, in my experience, you might want to even go home and he talked to another officer also involved, and it was suggested, hey, write down notes to yourself because you're not going to give a statement for 2 days, but there's things that you remember that you don't want to forget to tell the investigators because they understand that they're under extreme scrutiny. And regardless of the fact that it is most definitely a human possibility that you will remember something later you don't remember now or even during the interview, feel very much under the gun in terms of if they miss something in that formal interview or forget some detail, that somehow they'll be viewed as not being honest or trying to hide something. So I think it's extremely important for us as chiefs, law enforcement leaders, to let them know that that's a very real phenomenon and that's okay. I mean, just like anyone else we would interview where information may change down the road.
Yeah, I would concur. I know in Jacksonville, they have 72 hours to give a statement, and I encourage them to take all the time they need it, use all that 72 hours if they need it. There's no rush. Sit down with your counsel and go over it, and before you come in and give your statement. Like you said, a lot of things come to mind the day after that are not especially clear the day of or the night of the shooting itself.
I think annual mental health checks are also important for mental health stability in our organizations. And I think the way that we reduce stigma is really by our leadership in terms of bringing that in as an organizational norm. Back in the days, I'm sure when we first started, you would be involved in a shooting incident. They'd say, okay, you're okay, come back to work tomorrow and hit the streets. It wasn't until years later that actually science and psychology caught up with our profession. And so we had a lot of cops out there that were suffering from PTSD that were afraid to come forward with it because that wasn't the norm. A lot of the things that we do, especially when an officer is killed in the line of duty, the world doesn't stop because an officer was killed in the line of duty. And you got to go up in front of your troops that very next day, which is a very hard position to be in, and make sure that they're okay to go back out. And it's there's that kind of trauma as well in making, I think, the debriefs, group debriefs and mental health checks a normal process. I think helps a lot to minimize stigma and makes it part of your organizational norm. And it's really good for our law enforcement professionals.
Agreed. After the first police-involved shooting that occurred in Jacksonville, I had our EAP professionals come out and address our roll calls every 3 months, 4 times a year. I thought it was necessary that it came out and reinforced that with the troops, that it's okay to talk about it. And not just shootings, whatever's going on in their life that's causing them trauma. Our men and women see so many traumatic incidents out here in the course of a day. Abuses and murders of children, all kinds of things that will affect them for life. And it's important that they have the proper help available to debrief about that and come to terms with it.
Yeah, and the peer support really plays a big role here, not only for our officers, but for our civilians as well. Our dispatchers actually ended up playing a very huge role in our peer support program. We forget about them a lot of times being down there, but they're hearing it, they're experiencing it, and they usually don't get closure, and that takes a toll on them. And and if it was my idea to hold the sergeants accountable, we have to have them the training so that they can recognize the issues. So not only our peer support, but make sure they reach out and train the sergeant so that they can identify issues and before they.
You brought up a good point, Stacy. We don't consider the dispatchers as cops, but they're giving out these blood-curdling calls on the air, and they're wondering what's going on, and then you hear an officer shout out, I'm hit, and it's traumatizing for them. They feel like they could jump through the phone and go out there and help these guys, and they can't. And they're just waiting to hear, did somebody get to him or her? Did they get them to a hospital? Did they get them help?
No, absolutely. And we've gone through a process of involving some of our dispatchers at their own volition, inviting them into our training, not only critical incidents, but pursuit training, just to see what it looks like from the officer perspective to help them understand that, but also to be a part of the debriefs. I think that's critically important. Fire department personnel, the whole, anyone that involved in the incident, I think it's extremely important and appropriate that they be involved in that. In terms of implementing things like this, I don't know, I think it's equally important for us to effectively message to our elected officials who make budgetary decisions how important this is, so that we have the ability to get it in our budget and we can provide that to our officers. Because I don't know what your experience has been, but at times that's an issue that prevents something that's really necessary for moving forward until something really bad happens. And then there's reflection and, wow, maybe we should have done that. So, I guess it's incumbent upon us to make good arguments with good information to make sure that those programs like that get into place.
I concur with you, sir. I know about a year and a half ago, we had a bad spat of suicides in Chicago PD, about 6 in a period of 5 months. And it came out in the news media that the department only had 4 therapists to serve a department of 13,000 individuals. And people were just outraged about it. And I've been retired for some time, but I was outraged to hear that news too. And I found out they went out and hired 11 new therapists, so that they had a supply to help out the officers. Because, it's not just a person that took their life, it's the person and the people that knew them too that are traumatized. Because many times they don't see any inkling that this is coming, and it catches them completely off guard emotionally.
Yeah, and I think one last area of training I can think about is just in recruit training officers, let them know what's available for them, the signs, and that it's okay to come, to come forward with this stuff, but they need to be trained on the signs and be able to recognize it. So.
And like you said, peer support plays a big deal in that. They're the eyes and ears.
Yeah, and I think if you have the ability to bring in a police psychologist or someone like that, or you're talking about therapists that actually integrate them into the department a little bit, allow them to do ride-alongs with the cops, it's almost preventative medicine in a sense. And very much like we would partner with mental health for our community members or a social worker with our community members, I think it's equally as important to have those relationships with those professionals for our officers.
I agree.
That's a good point. We had chaplains that would come out and ride, and this was before peer support really took off, so they were kind of wearing that hat, and nobody wanted the chaplain, but it was shared with me later. The chaplains would have very valuable conversations in those cars with officers, because once you're riding together, it's the stigma of going to someone's office isn't there. It's like, oh, the chaplain's riding with me tonight. But once you get out, they really open up and start talking. So that's a great idea to substitute for the chaplain.
Okay.
You want me to read number 2?
Go ahead, sir.
Please discuss the role of social media in policing. How and when do you believe social media is an effective tool in policing? How and when do you believe social media creates challenges for police departments? And talk about your role in creating social media strategy or overseeing the use of social media in your police department as an organizational leader. And we only have 15 minutes to discuss all that.
Woo. Not enough time.
So the role of social media in policing, I think that has definitely changed over the last few years. I see the role as the police department's ability to tell their story, to control their story, their image. I know a lot of agencies now, they release their press releases right out through the media. But not only that, we're very bad at tooting our own horn, letting people know when we're doing good.
Yes.
If we can get that out on social media, post it out so people can follow it and see what's going on, that's always a plus. And then how and when do you believe social media is an effective tool? I think I just kind of covered that with media releases, putting out information. A lot of people look to Facebook that's where they get their news now.
Twitter.
Twitter, Instagram, all the social medias. They're just not getting it from just the news anymore. I would say this one here, I struggle with this. How do you believe it creates challenges? I think the fact that our officers have grown up living on social media to limit their interaction, and we limited their interaction. You could not publicly make comments about that. I think it's time to really take a hard look at that. there are reasons to keep the officers from posting on there, but then again, this is positive messaging out there. It personalizes and humanizes the officers if they are using it and putting it out there. Where it could come back to bite you if that officer ever wants to do undercover work, which is rare. You know, if they've been all over social media, that's not an option. It opens them up to the public getting more of their information. But I think there's a lot of positives there, and I think it's time as an industry we rethink that and maybe look with some nice parameters there. And then lastly, overseeing. I know we really got into social media when I was the assistant chief and the PIO was over top of, was underneath my command, and I was the youngest assistant chief. And the senior assistant chief, we started discussing social media, and he's like, so how do we use this Facebook stuff? You know, so there's so much out there where, and I think now most people are up to speed on it, but we have to educate ourselves.
Yeah, that's
Know
true.
what's out there, and if, you know, the command staffs need to know what's going on, what the abilities are, and what the limits. So that was my role. I really helped. So we took that avenue of releasing things out on social media, and our PIO really took the bull by the horns and started telling our story and really publicizing us.
Yeah, I think role-wise, it's very important to get our story out through a couple, multiple social media platforms. But, the role also helps us quite a bit in terms of solving crimes for the community and putting out community alerts in times of disaster or situations in which we're investigating an ongoing incident. We're trying to keep people out of an area. So I think it's really important to have a strong social media following and various platforms that reach people, things that are mobile as well. And we get a lot of positive responses in belief from our community in terms of identifying persons involved in all kinds of crimes. So that's extremely helpful as well. I think in terms of challenges to social media, there is the belief that somehow we are monitoring our social media on a 24/7 posture, and that's generally not possible for law enforcement agencies. So we kind of have a catch-22 situation in which we very much want to be involved in the social media platform and push information out and get information from our community. But sometimes it might be, especially if there's a weekend, if our PIO is not working a weekend, we don't have an assigned officer who may monitor on those non-office hour timeframes, a gap in getting significant information, and then sometimes that leads into some negative comments or folks think that we're not paying attention. So I think the public has to understand that it's an important platform. It may not be monitored 24/7, and the other part of it is that sometimes people are very inappropriate on our
Yes,
social
on
media
our social media
platforms.
platforms, yes.
And there's a number of mechanisms and tools within those platforms that will automatically wipe some of that, but, people are also pretty clever about how to work around that. And
Yes.
so, we struggle to deal with that and again, hope that the community understands we don't condone any of those really inappropriate conducts or comments rather, but sometimes we don't find it right away.
Right.
And so I think that's another challenge.
It's a blessing and a curse, really it is.
Yeah, but it's reality, right? And
If you
so,
if you got somebody out there monitoring it all the time, it can be a boon to your police department. If
Well-
you don't have somebody monitoring constantly, it can be a real embarrassment to your agency.
Right, and sometimes you have, as we had a situation recently in Beloit where, PIO catches something through Facebook that's maybe not posted on ours, but through the Facebook network catches an issue with the department and can bring that to our attention. Now, that's another challenge because, we may not have the resources to watch social media all over the place all the time and respond appropriately to it, but I think in terms of recognizing things that are significant, posts that may be going viral that may not be accurate and that would be best to try and respond to, getting the PIO on top of those. So it's really part of the relationship and the strategy between the chief and the public information officer to respond appropriately to those so that we can also maintain our reputation or address things that may be awry.
I was very blessed in Jacksonville to have a former reporter who was my PIO, and she did an excellent job keeping up our Facebook page and put a lot of timely stuff out there. We even got a lot of tips on crime through our Facebook page, but she was very diligent on it. I was blessed to have her. If you don't have someone who's really going to be diligent on it, then it may not be worth having. I don't have Facebook, I don't have Twitter, I don't have Instagram, but I realize as a leader, as a law enforcement executive, you've really got to have it for your agency. You're better off to have it than not have it, because you might get that tip of a lifetime that solves a really heinous crime where no one came forward as a witness, no one will come forward as a witness, but someone put something out there on social media that leads you in the direction you need to go to find the perpetrator. So you got to take the chance that something will come through there that's worthwhile, because usually something will. You don't know when it's going to happen, but it will happen.
Okay, let's go on to number 3. Many in the community want change and progress in law enforcement. Many also want to know that the Fargo Police Department will not lose sight of protect and serve. What is the first thing that you would like to implement into the future of policing at the city of Fargo that you feel is a step in the right direction? Well, I think in terms of first thing out of the gate that needs to be implemented, in terms not only of progress in the department, but increasing community support and transparency, is the implementation of a body-worn camera system. I think everyone's in agreement in terms of the benefits of that, both to the community and to the police department. While it is expensive technology in today's law enforcement world, it's really a necessary piece of equipment that we need to have. And it puts us in a position where we're able to make determinations in situations where we otherwise may not be able to make determinations, even though we spend a lot of time investigating, interviewing, et cetera. And when you spend that much time and at the end of the day, a community member doesn't have a disposition one way or the other, that doesn't help them and it doesn't help law enforcement. So I think that's an extremely necessary piece initially, and wrapped around, again, what I think is equally important for the department is establishing, with input from the members, vision, mission, and values that everyone has bought into, and that is part of our brand. So when you talk about protect and serve, that's it's the nostalgic, historical way that police see law enforcement. But really, we are guardians of our community. And so we have a responsibility to keep our community safe. Protecting and serving is part of that, but guarding them from others, themselves, et cetera, is a very important role. And I think
Equally important.
Equally important, agreed. Role that I think the department needs to wrap itself around and the community would then buy into. So I think those two things are important initially to inform the community that, we're working on progress and we've got a vision going forward.
Does the city have posted cameras out on various venues out here? Okay, that's a good thing. But I agree, I concur completely with David. You've got to have a body cam system. We're seeing many more and more incidents occurring where people don't believe the police because there was no body cam either available or the officer didn't have the body cam on when the incident occurred. And you got to have an extensive training program where officers understand. You get out a caller on these hot calls, camera's got to be on the minute you're stepping out the door. You may not have time to put it on otherwise. And like I said, if it didn't get captured on camera with a lot of the public, they decide that it didn't occur the way the officer said. So you got to have a body camera system, and you got to have a buy-in to everybody with regard to what is our mission, what is our core values, where are we moving forward as an agency, and everybody has to be on board. We got, they say putting the oars in the water, moving the ship in the right direction at the right time with everybody pulling in the same direction.
And the question is kind of set up, how do you keep, protect, and serve and implement technology? I don't think they're separate. I think with society the way it is today, technology is the future. Body cameras have been out 10, 12 years, and we're just now looking to implement them here. I know there is an old saying, I think Benjamin Franklin may have said it, you don't want to be first, but you don't want to be last. Well, Fargo's pretty close to last. So what technology is out there now that we've got to catch up with? I know you have a drone program. You're in infancy of that, but there are agencies that are using drones to handle calls. When a call comes in, they'll deploy the drone, and if they can kill it, that saves or take care of the call and kill the officer response. That eliminates, that frees that officer up. The footage is being shot back. I know that we're on the verge of AI technology that will actually identify body camera. It will pick up things in the videos and alert supervisors of derogatory phrases or when an officer's tone raises that might implicate force. So there's so much technology there and it's growing so fast. Just don't know how. It's going to be very difficult to keep up with it. So, but at least we are moving that direction. So we evaluate everything. Since we're going down this road of body cameras, keep open eyes.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think the other important piece is, soften law enforcement. I'm sure over the course of our careers, we can think about, usually things happen or get implemented after a bad event. And it's really important that as progressive leaders, as progressive agencies, we are looking ahead of the curve. We're not waiting for the next George Floyd or Rashard Brooks or an incident like that to happen before we get in front of it. And so one of the things I think is important to implement in the department, along with other team operations, is a group of interested cops that could start exploring and look forward to what's the future technology that's out there that may
Enhance law enforcement.
thank you very much, enhance law enforcement operations going forward, and look at it and start to be a pilot agency and start to, instead of waiting for something to happen, or when something comes up, because a lot of times we hear from our community, hey, we just saw these bowler wraps, and we want you to buy those bowler wraps. All this stuff is quite costly.
Sure.
No one's really evaluated it. We may be in the position, we have already evaluated it. We didn't think it was effective enough, especially effective enough for the cost, and we've already decided we don't need to explore it, or we're already in the midst of exploring how we can bring that technology into our department. So, I mean, if we don't have people out there looking for that, then we're subjugated back to, we wait until something happens, and then we come forward with a proposal. So I think it's real beneficial to be looking in front of the curve.
Yeah, and we can take it a step further too. A lot of this technology that's being developed, they need real-world feedback. So if we know that it's out there and it's being worked on, we can approach these companies and actually be there, provide the feedback from the street. If it's something we don't really feel that's want to put something experimental on the street, we could always work on that in a training environment, or if it's on the verge of going live, we could go ahead and start using it. So there's an advantage. It's a win for the company that's making this technology, and we, with our group, are right on the forefront and continue leading the region and law enforcement here.
I would concur with you about the bowler wraps. I've been looking at a lot of videos on them, and I'm not really convinced that they're all they're purported to be. I mean, if someone's standing still, yeah, it's going to wrap around there perfectly. But if they're running towards you, I think there's going to be a problem with it being an effective, less than lethal stopping tool that they're purporting it to be.
Right, and I think the issue is, for me right now, I can't say that we've evaluated it. So if asked, in what if, sometimes there's a push. Okay, we need this now. And the opportunity to evaluate passes us up, and then we find out later that it really wasn't worth the money or the effort, versus something else that may be out there. So I think that's important to be out viewing that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Are there any follow-up questions for the candidates?
I do have a follow-up. Regarding social media, how do y'all feel about like mug shots on the Fargo police page?
I would have to ask you, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I would have to ask you, do they put mug shots on the Fargo PD?
They do, and then the comments are just disgusting. And I might also add, it kind of exposes a nasty part of Fargo. Mm-hmm. Like a brown face will garner hundreds of nasty comments. Mm-hmm. It's a function of color almost. Like a brown face has 200 comments. A less brown face will have 5. Even looking at the same crime, like a sexual offender, right? There was one lighter one and a darker one, and the number of comments under the darker one was it was out of hand. Barely any for the lighter skinned person. So, how do you feel about social media and having it be a cesspool for people to come out and just say the nastiest stuff?
I'll say this, Mr. Boynton. I see that some police departments are making a trend of getting away from posting mug shots just for that reason, because it's kind of like the Willie Horton syndrome in the political campaign years ago. They put a black face up there and people said, oh my God, this guy is whatever. People do tend to respond negatively when they see people of color on the news and various other social media avenues, mugshots, depicting them as criminals, and it does play over into, for lack of a better description, systemic racism. And I see many agencies are just doing away with mugshots just for that reason, because as you say, I've noticed also that when they put a black face up there, the comments do get ugly and they get very lengthy, as opposed to someone who's non-black or lighter complected. It's there, and we can't deny it's there. I've seen it, and I know obviously you've seen it, and I've noticed it myself. So I think you're going to see in the future more police departments will get away from mugshots. They may just let that happen with the news media itself, the network news, and police departments are going to refrain from that in the future. That's what I see occurring most likely.
I think as a profession, we're beyond shaming, and that's really what the mugshots are. However, with that being said, if there's a reason to put it out, if we're a wanted person, notifying the public of somebody dangerous, that's a different issue. But just to shame and say, hey, look at all the people we arrested for prostitution this week, I think we're beyond that as a society and a profession.
I would concur.
Yeah, I would agree with, in terms of arrests, I don't think there's really any reason to post an arrest photo. Oftentimes that is done by the media. So I don't think there's a reason to post it on our social media, although it will still be out there via the media. But I also think there is a significant public interest in posting persons who are wanted, because especially if they're wanted for significant crimes. The public does have a right to know that, and that has led to locations and arrests of many people who are wanted. So I think it's a somewhat gray area, and the unfortunate part of this is what some of those comments reveal, is that we got a lot of work to do in our community. It's not just the police department. We have a lot of people in our community who boldly will post stuff on social media because we're not face-to-face that they would never say in front of someone else. And so while there's a lot of benefits to social media, it acts as camouflage for those that want to be inappropriate or be racist or be discriminatory. And it's a difficult thing for us to navigate through, but I think we have to weigh the pros and the cons. And as these two gentlemen have said, we can make a discernment between someone arrested, they're arrested, so go to the media, versus someone who's wanted and maybe a danger to the public.
Let's say if they were wanted, and you had to post a mugshot, or I guess a sexual offender, you would want to, well, I don't really know. Maybe you want to post those mugshots. But what about just disabling the comments? What about just put the picture up
That's
and
definitely
disable
an
the
option that
comments?
should be looked at. I would concur with that.
So
Because we know what's going to come down the pipeline, so why not just shut that off? I see certain articles in the news, in the New York Daily News, in the New York Times, in the New York, once in a while in the Washington Post, where they'll just say comments are disabled, because they know what's coming down the pipeline. And they may as well just shut it down so it doesn't get out there.
Yeah, go ahead, sir.
No problem with that at all. If it's legally, we can do that. I know that in Virginia, you could not delete comments. So if the nasty comment showed up on our page, sorry, we legally couldn't do it. I'd check and see where we stand here, but I like that. And, maybe put something in the post. Comments are locked. However, call 1-800-LOCK-YOU-UP, whatever the means are. That's a great idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I'm in agreement with that. It's an IT question that's beyond my current capabilities, but if I recall correctly, I don't know if you can do that on just one part of the Facebook without eliminating comments across the board, and I think there is a legal issue on that, although these would be questions I'd have to get answers to. I think that would be an appropriate thing to do if we could do it. And especially with the sexual offenders, I believe we are mandated by state law to publish certain levels of sexual offender. But again, I think if we can address the comments, that would make perfect sense, as there's really no reason to comment. We've notified the community as we're required to do and move on from there.
Dave, I don't have a Facebook account, but I know on LinkedIn, I've seen people put articles on there and disable comments for that very reason. So I would assume if you can do it on LinkedIn, I would assume you can probably do it on Facebook too. But I agree, sometimes you just need to make sure that people don't even go down that path. Just put the wooden horses off to block the road off. But you see a lot of news agencies will put down there, comments will be discerned, and any offensive comments will be deleted. But still, they sit there for a while, and people see them, and it tends to feed, the monster tends to feed itself. Someone says, oh, they put that, well, I'm going to put something down even more disgusting. And before you know it, it has a ripple effect. So I would agree. It probably just best to just disable comments for a lot of that stuff. You're welcome. Any other questions? Going once.
It's late.
All right, with no other follow-up questions, we will ask the three of you to go back up to the HR office, and the HR team will give you further instructions once you get up there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
And for the committee, just a couple of quick notes. We would ask for you to complete your scoring and turn in the sheets as soon as possible. We will be compiling the scores as quickly as we can while we take a 15 to 20-minute break. And then while you're away on break, we'll be putting our tables into a circle for discussion. So if you have any purses or personal items with you, if you can either take those with you if you leave the room or put them on your chair, just so they stay with your table. Thank you.